Welcome back to Grimoire Audiobooks. Today, we're thrilled to bring you part one of Harry Potter and the Masters of Time, a side-splitting adventure from the Oh God, Not Again series by the wonderfully imaginative Sarah 1281. In this captivating fanfiction, we dive into chapters 1 through 10, where Harry embarks on a chaotic journey through time, rewriting history with a blend of cleverness and unintentional hilarity. As timelines intertwine and destinies get a humorous remix, Harry finds himself entangled in a series of events that promise to leave you both laughing and marveling at the twists and turns. With Sarah 1281's trademark wit, this story is a whirlwind of surprises, mischief, and brilliantly reimagined moments in the wizarding world. Sarah 1281 is a fanfiction icon known for her humorous and inventive takes on the Harry Potter universe. Oh God, Not Again! And its related tales showcase her ability to weave absurdity and brilliance together, creating stories that fans can't get enough of. Disclaimer: this fanfiction is a transformative work based on J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series. All original characters, settings, and trademarks belong to their respective owners. This reading is created purely for entertainment, with no copyright infringement intended. So, sit back, relax, and prepare for a magical roller coaster with Harry Potter and the Masters of Time by Sarah 1281 at Grimoire Audiobooks. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more magical adventures. Once we reach 25 likes and 25 comments, the next part of this epic tale will be on its way. Let's dive into the hilarity of chapters 1 through 10 and begin this magical journey. Chapter 1. Disclaimer: I do not own Harry Potter. Note: please be aware that this is a parody. I know that this may seem redundant, as that is made clear as it is labeled parody in the genre section at the top, but some people do not look at that apparently, and I have gotten quite a few reviews from people who thought it was too over the top to enjoy until they noticed that it was a parody. If you are one of those people, then be sure to be aware of this now. This is a parody. Also, this story had at least 20 chapters published before a Harry Potter musical even came out. I didn't even hear of it, let alone see it until after the story was completed. Please keep that in mind when wondering if the references to the musical are intentional. He'd been dreaming of it since the defeat of Voldemort. The veil, that is. The one that Sirius had fallen behind. The last time he dreamed about the Department of Mysteries, Sirius had died. The world had also finally woken up to the truth about Voldemort, but the price had been too high for him to be grateful. And once the truth was out, the attacks had gotten worse. He wondered briefly why he was there. Ginny was at home. She was pregnant. She needed him. Yet he could not seem to stay away. Voldemort was gone, true. But then, so were so many other people, good people who should not have died. He counted the steps until he was standing right in front of where Sirius had fallen through.
Cedric.
Sirius. Dumbledore. Hedwig. Moody.
Dobby.
Tonks' father. Remus. Colin Creevey.
Tonks. Snape. Fred.
Hell, even Crabbe didn't deserve to die then. There were more, many more, but none of them close to him. They were close to somebody, though. Maybe that was why he couldn't stay away. Why he couldn't look away. Why, even at that very moment, he couldn't walk away. Harry awoke with a start. He was lying on a floor, covered by a poor excuse for a blanket, and someone appeared to be attempting to break the door down. "Where's the cannon?" Dudley asked. Dudley? Where had the veil sent him? Could this be when Hagrid first told him about Hogwarts? It must be, because he couldn't recall any other time where he and Dudley had been sleeping in what appeared to be a shack. There was a crash behind them, and Uncle Vernon came skidding into the room, holding a rifle. Harry snorted. Like that would do any good against Hagrid. His uncle didn't seem to know that, though, and shouted, "Who's there? I warn you I am armed." Although it did occur to Harry that when people were trying to break in, it can generally be assumed that they are probably armed as well. And as if they didn't know that a wizard had come for Harry. Who else could even get across in this weather? Not to mention, who else would even bother?
Smash.
The door flew clean off its hinges and landed on the floor with a thunderous crash. Hagrid stood in the doorway, looking very impressive. Now, Harry hadn't exactly planned this, but he figured that he might as well make the best of it. Things hadn't exactly turned out terribly when he had taken down Voldemort, but they also hadn't been all that great. Maybe he was getting a second chance. And if that was the case, there was no way in hell he wasn't going to take it. Couldn't make a cup of tea, could ya? It's not been an easy journey, Hagrid began, and completely ruined his frightening first impression. He strode over to the sofa where Dudley sat, petrified. Budge up, yeah, great lump, he told him, watching as Dudley ran to go hide behind his mother, who was in turn hiding behind her husband. And here's Harry. Last time I saw you, you was only a baby. Ya look a lot like ya dad. By Yevy got your mum's eyes. I demand that you leave at once, sir. Uncle Vernon demanded, making a funny rasping noise. You are breaking and entering. Ah, shut up, Dursley, ya great prune. Harry grinned. He had been much too confused to enjoy Hagrid's verbal throwdown of his uncle the last time around. When Hagrid reached over and turned the gun into a pretzel, Harry's grin only grew wider. Anyway, Hagrid said, turning his attention back to Harry as though people regularly went around turning deadly weapons into the shapes of tasty snack food. Harry, very happy birthday to ya. Got some at Feria here, I might have sat on it at some point, but it'll taste all right. He pulled out a cake that said, Happy Birthday, Harry, written on it in green icing. Why, thank you, Harry said gratefully, accepting the cake. He did wish, though, that Hagrid hadn't used a Slytherin color, even if it did match his eyes. You seem to know me, but if, as you said, we haven't seen each other since I was a baby, perhaps you could be so kind as to introduce yourself? Harry asked politely. Hagrid chuckled. Oh, course. Rubeus Hagrid, keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. And with that, he shook Harry's arm up and down. What about that tea then, I'd not say no ter summit strong, if Yevy got it, mind. I'm sorry, we left in rather a hurry, so we don't have anything to drink, Harry said apologetically. S'all right, I've got summit here, Hagrid said, turning towards the fireplace, and then back once he got a roaring fire going. He then proceeded to pull a good dozen or so things out of his coat pockets. Uncle Vernon said sharply, Don't touch anything he gives you, Dudley. Hagrid chuckled darkly. Your great puddin' of a son don't need fattenin' any more, Dursley, don't worry. Hagrid passed Harry the sausages and he thanked him cordially for his thoughtfulness, then decided that it would be suspicious to just accept this, and so asked Hagrid for more details. Call me Hagrid, everyone does. And like I told ya, I'm keeper of keys at Hogwarts. You'll know all about Hogwarts. Oh, course. Harry nodded. Of course. Uncle Vernon's eyes bulged. You do. Yes, Harry answered calmly. But how? We were always so careful not to let you get any dangerous ideas. How'd you hear about all this wizarding nonsense? Now wait just 1 second. Hagrid thundered, leaping to his feet. In his anger, he seemed to fill the whole hut. The Dursleys cowered against the wall. Do you mean to tell me, he growled at the Dursleys, that you told this boy, nothing about anything? No, Harry said, shaking his head ruefully. They didn't. Hagrid looked as if he was about to explode. Dursley, he boomed. Uncle Vernon, who had gone very pale, whispered something that sounded like Mimblewimble. But if Daddy didn't tell Harry anything, how does he know? Dudley asked, speaking up for the first time from behind his mother. Hagrid looked expectantly at Harry. Fair point, Harry admitted. Well, it's just that people have spent the last 10 years following me around and shaking my hand and bowing to me, generally just appearing very honored to meet me, and eventually you pick some things up. It's not enough to pick things up, Harry. You've got to know. But I do know, Harry countered. About Hogwarts, about my parents, about Voldemort. Hagrid shuddered. Don't say the name. Harry shrugged. Old habits die hard. Although if I ever go camping again, I'll make sure to take your advice. Well, we'll be heading to Diagon Alley tomorrow? Oh, of course, Hagrid nodded. I am not paying for some crackpot old fool to teach him magic tricks, yelled Uncle Vernon. Harry might have known Uncle Vernon would insist on provoking Hagrid. Quick as a flash, he'd brought his umbrella, containing the pieces of his wand, swishing down through the air to point at Dudley. A flash of violet light, loud boom, and pig squeal later, Dudley was dancing on the spot with his hands clasped over his fat bottom, howling in pain. When he turned around, Harry could see the curly pig's tail poking a hole through the back of his pants. Uncle Vernon roared. Pulling Aunt Petunia and Dudley into the other room, he cast one last terrified look at Hagrid and slammed the door behind them. Hagrid looked down at his umbrella and stroked his beard. "Shouldn't ha' lost me temper," he said ruefully, but it didn't work anyway. Meant to turn him into a pig, but I suppose he was so much like a pig anyway, there wasn't much left to do. He cast a sideways look at Harry under his bushy eyebrows. "Be grateful if ye didn't mention that ter anyone at Hogwarts," he said. "I'm not supposed ter do magic, strictly speakin'. I was allowed ter do a bit ter follow ya and get your letters to ya and stuff. One o' the reasons I was so keen ter take on the job dash." "Of course not," Harry assured him. "It's getting late, so we should probably turn in." "Right you are, Harry," Hagrid agreed. "We've got lots to do tomorrow. Gotta get up ter town, get all your books and all that." He took off his thick black coat and threw it to Harry.
"You can kip under that," he said.
"Don't mind if it wriggles a bit. I think I still got a couple o' dormice in one o' the pockets." Harry woke early the next morning. Although he could tell it was daylight, he kept his eyes shut tight. "It was a dream," he told himself firmly. "I dreamt I was back to when Hagrid came to tell me I was going to a Hogwarts. When I open my eyes, I'll be at home with Ginny." There was suddenly a loud tapping noise. "And there's Hedwig Jr. knocking on the window," Harry thought, relieved, still not getting up.
Tap, tap, tap.
"All right," Harry mumbled. "I'm getting up." He sat up and Hagrid's heavy coat fell off him. The hut was full of sunlight. The storm was over. Hagrid himself was asleep on the collapsed sofa, and there was an owl rapping its claw on the window, a newspaper held in its beak. Harry's heart sank. It hadn't been a dream after all. He quickly paid the owl and handed the Daily Prophet to Hagrid. He then listened patiently as the half-giant explained to him about Gringotts. Then they got into the Dursleys' boat and headed off towards London and Diagon Alley, leaving the Dursleys to fend for themselves, realized Harry, with malicious glee. He knew they'd get home before he would, and besides, it really served them right. All too soon they were in the leaky cauldron. As before, everyone was very eager to shake his hand. Eventually, a pale young man made his way to Harry, his left eye twitching something terrible. "Professor Quirrell," said Hagrid. "Harry, Professor Quirrell will be one of your teachers at Hogwarts." "P.P. Potter," stammered Professor Quirrell, grasping Harry's hand. "See, can't he tell you how pleased I am to meet you?" Harry briefly wondered how he could stand touching him, but realized he must not have been possessed yet. Probably wouldn't be until he failed to secure the stone. He also wondered why in the world he felt the need to stutter the whole year. He could appear perfectly innocent, especially compared to the likes of Severus Snape, just fine without it, and quite frankly it was annoying. Besides, according to Snape's memory, Dumbledore had been onto Quirrell from the beginning. He supposed that Hagrid neglected to mention that this was Quirrell's first year teaching, so as not to freak him out with the dada job curse. He decided to bring that up. "So, how long have you been teaching?" he inquired. "Well, actually, this is my first year, but I'm very excited," Quirrell said, looking a bit sheepish. "What subject do you teach?" Harry asked, knowing the answer perfectly well, but that was just the sort of question people asked their future teachers. "Defense against the dark arts," muttered Professor Quirrell, as though he'd rather not think about it. Yes, Quirrell and his master, Voldemort, would probably be much happier without such pesky things as defenses against the dark arts being taught. "And not that you need it, P.P. Potter," he laughed nervously. "You'll be getting all your equipment, I suppose?" "I've got to pick up a new book on vampires and myself." He looked terrified at the very thought. Harry marveled when he thought about the fact that this was the very first person he could remember trying to kill him. The other patrons of the bar quickly interrupted, and it took nearly 10 minutes for Hagrid to extricate Harry from his throng of admirers. Things progressed pretty much the same from then on, until it was time to go to Madame Malkin's to get his uniform. When Harry went inside, he froze. He'd almost forgotten about his first meeting with Draco Malfoy, here before either of them knew anything about the path that was chosen for the other. Because they were arch-rivals. Before he found out that Draco, though undoubtedly unpleasant, wasn't evil and had more or less redeemed himself. Harry thought. Could be fun. "Hello," said Draco. "Hogwarts, too?" "Yes," Harry nodded. "My father's next door buying my books and mother's up the street looking at wands," said Malfoy. He had the same bored, drawling voice at 11 as he did at 23. "Not much point of that until you get there, though, right?" Harry asked. "True, but she needs something to do while I'm in here. After that, I'm going to drag them off to look at racing brooms. I don't see why first years can't have their own. I think I'll bully father into getting me one, and I'll smuggle it in somehow. They probably won't check the luggage, so if you just shrink it, you can carry it in, and then unshrink it once you're there. Of course, you'd have to claim it belonged to an older student if anyone asked, but that shouldn't be too difficult," Harry suggested. Draco looked at Harry approvingly. "That just might work. I'd have to learn how to unshrink things, but until then I could get an older student to do that as well. Say, have you got your own brooms?" "Not at the moment," Harry answered, non-committally. "Play Quidditch at all?" "Of course I'm Seeker." "You?"
Same.
"Father says it's a crime if I'm not picked to play for my house, and I must say I agree. Know what house you'll be in yet? I think I'd like to be in Gryffindor. I hear they have the best parties." "Well, that's okay, if you're into that sort of thing. I'm going to be in Slytherin. All our family has been there dash." "Well, that's okay, if you're into that sort of thing," Harry interrupted, and he could have sworn he saw Draco's mouth twitch upwards. "Imagine being in Hufflepuff. I think I'd leave, wouldn't you?" "Well, maybe not leave. That's a bit drastic, but I'd definitely defect. I mean, Hufflepuff sounds like a brand of marshmallows or pillows or something." This time he knew he wasn't imagining it. Draco Malfoy, fighting a smile because of something he, Harry Potter, had said. He never thought he'd see the day. This actually was sort of fun. Why weren't they friends again? "I say, look at that man." Harry turned to where Draco was pointing and saw Hagrid standing outside the window, grinning at Harry and pointing to 2 large ice creams to show that he couldn't come in. "That's Hagrid. He works at Hogwarts." "Oh, I've heard of him. He's sort of a servant, isn't he?"
Oh.
"That's why. He's the gamekeeper." "Yes, exactly." Draco nodded impatiently. "No, not exactly. There's a difference between a gamekeeper and a servant. Maybe not a profound difference, but it is definitely something that any manor lord should know," Harry said, knowing full well that Draco would inherit Malfoy Manor someday. He was pleased to note Draco's ears were pink. "I heard he's a sort of savage, lives in a hut in the school grounds, and every now and then he gets drunk, tries to do magic, and ends up setting fire to his bed." "Well," Harry said, remembering how Hagrid had carried him back to Hogwarts when Voldemort had nearly killed him and struggling to keep his temper. "I'd wager a guess that it's a bit difficult to do magic when drunk under the best of circumstances. And not everyone can live in manors. If they did, then it wouldn't be so special, now would it? And people would have to find new ways to flaunt their wealth." Draco nodded, considering. "You're right, I never thought I'd say this, but the Hagrids of the world are needed to contrast with the right sort of people." Now, Harry knew exactly what he meant by the right sort of people, but pretended he didn't to avoid a scene. "Hey, is he with you?" "Yes," Harry said simply.
Why?
"Where are your parents?" "Godric's Hollow." "Why didn't they come with you, then?" Draco pressed. "Well, they would have, but Voldemort killed them, see," Harry explained. Draco's eyes widened. "You said the Dark Lord's name." Harry nodded.
Yes.
"Yes, I did." Draco didn't seem to be able to think of anything to say to that, so instead he asked, "But they were our kind, weren't they?" Harry fought the urge to roll his eyes. If they weren't, why would Voldemort bother with them personally? He was rather busy and important near the end, or so I hear, and had other people to kill muggles for him. I really don't think they should let Muggleborns in, do you? They're just not the same. They've never been brought up to know our ways. Some of them have never even heard of Hogwarts until they get the letter. Imagine. Well, I don't think it's not having heard of Hogwarts that should concern you, per se, as much as they haven't heard about magic or know anything about our culture, Harry said, not really answering the question. Yes, that's exactly why I think they should keep it in the old wizarding families. What's your last name, anyway? Before Harry could answer, Madame Malkin said, That's you done, my dear. Harry briefly wondered why he was done first when he had come in after Draco, but decided not to dwell on it. Well, I'll see you at Hogwarts, I suppose, Draco said. Later. See if you can guess my last name by then, and tell me on the train. I will, Draco said, suddenly determined. Shortly after that, Harry and Hagrid had purchased all of Harry's supplies, and he was back with the Dursleys. The last month wasn't so bad. His aunt and uncle mostly ignored him, and Dudley ran from the room screaming when he saw him. It wasn't so bad, really, as he had had plenty of experience with people ignoring and or fearing him in his first year, second year, fourth year, and fifth year for getting caught after getting rid of Norbert, being a Parselmouth, being the fourth champion, and being a lying schizophrenic, respectively. One thing he did do was make sure he memorized his potions textbook. He was not taking any chances there. Snape may have loved his mother, but he sure as hell hated him until he died. On the last day of August, Harry went down to the living room and cleared his throat, watching with some amusement as Dudley screamed and ran from the room. Harry supposed that that was what happened when Dudley's parents encouraged him to make Harry's life miserable and kept him in the dark about Harry having magical powers. Uncle Vernon? Uncle Vernon grunted to show he was listening. I need to be at King's Cross tomorrow to go to Hogwarts. Another grunt. Would it be all right if you gave me a lift?
Grunt.
Thank you. Funny way to get to a wizard school, the train. Magic carpets all got punctures, have they? No, but they're illegal in Britain, and I doubt they'd trust us to go straight to school and not let ourselves be seen if we each had one. Not to mention how expensive it would be. Where is this school, anyway? Scotland, Harry replied. Can you be any more specific? Uncle Vernon asked. Planning on coming up for family days? Aunt Petunia looked horrified. They have family day now. All right, we'll take you to King's Cross. We're going up to London tomorrow anyway, or I wouldn't bother. Great, Harry said, and left. To think only one more day, and he'd be back at Hogwarts. And he'd get to see Ginny, too, if only briefly. Yes, things might just work out after all if he could keep his temper this time around and not alienate the press and the ministry. Oh boy, this was going to be a long 7 years. Chapter 2. Well, there you are, boy, Uncle Vernon said, a nasty grin on his face. Platform 9, Platform 10. Your platform should be somewhere in the middle, but they don't seem to have built it yet, do they? Harry rolled his eyes. You're some kind of moron, you know that? And no, I wouldn't recommend trying anything in front of all these witnesses, Harry said casually as he watched his uncle's face begin to purple. He figured he was reasonably safe saying anything he wanted to him, seeing as how he wouldn't see him for 9 whole months. Of course they don't have the platform be obvious. It's a train for wizard children with wizard items that would attract far too much attention. Then where is it, boy? Vernon spat. You just walk right through the portal. I know it looks like a brick wall, but I assure you it's not. How is that possible, you ask? Magic. In fact, you can come with me if you like, and see it for yourself, Harry suggested. Uncle Vernon looked like he was about to lunge at Harry, but Harry just nodded towards the local constable who was standing not 20 feet away, and Uncle Vernon reluctantly backed down. You'll pay for that, boy, he whispered menacingly, and then walked back to his car. As they drove away, Harry saw Dudley and Aunt Petunia laughing. Clearly his uncle had lied about the encounter. Now, Harry was fully aware of the fact that antagonizing his uncle was probably not the best plan, but he had stood up to people 100 times more intimidating than the likes of Vernon Dursley, and so he wasn't about to just cower as he would have when he was really 11. Harry could basically write off any chance of improving relations with his uncle, but the rest of his family were a different story. He knew that his Aunt Petunia had once loved her sister and was more scared of what Harry's presence would mean in terms of her family's safety and jealous that Lily had always been the favorite. More than 15 years of resentment would be hard to overcome, but Harry had always hated summer and the fact that he never had anything to do, so he may as well try that. Dudley was another avenue that Harry could pursue. Granted, at this point in time, he was little more than a spoiled bully, but he did eventually come to accept Harry after the Demento incident. He wasn't quite sure how he could speed up a reconciliation with Dudley, but it might be worth looking into. It would definitely make life at Privet Drive more peaceful, that was for sure. Packed with muggles, of course. Harry looked up abruptly as he heard Mrs. Weasley's voice. He quickly hurried after them. Now, what's the platform number? Molly asked. Harry wondered briefly how in the world she managed to forget the platform number, since she'd been doing this for God knows how many years. 9 3/4. Ginny piped up. Mum, can I go? Harry couldn't help but grin. While they were both currently way too young for him to be having any romantic thoughts about her, she was still a cute kid. When all the Hogwarts-bound Weasleys save Ron had gone through, Harry approached them. Excuse me, Harry said. Hello, dear. First time at Hogwarts? Ron's new, too, Molly said kindly. Yes, Harry nodded before turning to Ron. Hi, my name's Harry Potter. As he anticipated, the reaction was immediate. Ron's eyes immediately flew to his forehead, and Ginny started squealing. Well, at least this way she wouldn't complain about not seeing him, though watching the love of his life act like a fangirl was somewhat irritating. Are you really? Ron asked. Are you really, Ron? Harry asked. Of course I am, Ron said, looking confused. Why wouldn't I be? I could say the same to you, Harry replied. But I can't believe that you'd be Harry Potter. Harry shrugged. Well, I suppose someone has to be, right? He said, casually brushing his hair out of his eyes and revealing the most famous scar in the history of magic. So anyway, I was wondering if you could help me find the platform, he asked, turning back to Mrs. Weasley. Mrs. Weasley, whose eyes had filled with tears upon finding out who Harry was, probably because such a polite boy had had such a tragic life and at such a young age, too, nodded. Of course, dear. All you have to do is walk straight at the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. Don't stop and don't be scared you'll crash into it. That's very important. Best do it at a bit of a run if you're nervous. Go on, go now before Ron. Harry thanked her for her help and walked through the platform. Harry looked around, smiling a little at the sight of everyone so much younger than the last time he saw them. Suddenly, one of the Weasley twins approached him. Want a hand? He asked. Unfortunately, Harry had no idea which one it was, as he had never been able to tell them apart to begin with, and George had lost his ear the summer after his 6th year, and then Fred had died, so he never really got an opportunity, even after he had married into the family. Thanks, Harry replied. Oi, Fred. Come here and help. Okay, now Harry was reasonably sure that Fred was the one who had approached him. After all, the twins never actually referred to themselves by their proper names, as apparently that was for lesser pranksters. Once the twins helped him, he again brushed his hair out of his eyes, this time more because the effort of lifting his school trunks, he should probably put a charm on it to lighten it, than because he had any great need to reveal himself to people who would hear him announce to everybody at his sorting soon enough. It was strange, though, to see George with 2 ears again. To see Fred alive again. His heart constricted briefly, and he tried to imagine how it'd be to see some of the other people he'd lost. Especially Sirius, who was still in Azkaban. What's that? George asked. Now that Harry had a good idea as to which one had first approached him, he knew that he'd be able to tell them apart, at least until they left his line of sight. Apparently Bill was the only one who had been consistently able to tell them apart, hence he was their favorite sibling. Well, Bill and Percy, but the latter was far too uptight to ever be idolized by the Weasley twins. Blimey, said Fred. Are you Dash? He is, George confirmed. Harry couldn't help but notice how surreal it was that the Weasley twins were, for once, not finishing each other's sentences. No matter how well they knew each other, that must be pretty difficult. Were they legilimens? Aren't you? Well, I'm seriously confused, if that's what you mean, Harry told them. Harry Potter, chorused the twins. Nope, Harry said cheerfully. You're not? Fred asked, bemused. No, I'm not. Have you ever met him? Harry asked. Well, no, but George began. Then what makes you think I'm him? Harry demanded. Well, you've got a scar, Fred offered. So, does Dumbledore, are you going to go accusing him of being Potter next? Of course not, George said, looking thoughtful. Filch, on the other hand. So, who are you then if you're not Harry Potter? Fred asked skeptically. And why do you have a lightning bolt scar on your foreheads? Well, after that nasty little incident with the Dark Lord, my mother decided that lightning bolt scars were in and shot a cutting curse at me. Harry paused. At least, that's the official story. I think that was before my father had the courage to be cut off for 3 months by telling her that maybe she should leave the cooking to the house elves. Fred and George just stared at him. Hey, don't judge. And I'm Draco Malfoy, by the way. He peered at them suspiciously. You are purebloods, right? Wordlessly, Fred nodded. George found his voice first. You're Draco Malfoy? You have a problem with that? Harry crossed his arms. No, but aren't your parents blonde? He asked. Your point being? How can 2 blonde people have a black-haired son? George asked reasonably. No. My mother was not having a very public affair with Severus Snape. How dare you even suggest that? Harry screeched. Fred held up his hands. Calm down, he didn't mean to offend you. Well, he did, Harry sniffed. In fact, I'm going to write to Father right now. Isn't he still at the platform? George asked, perplexed. Yes, he is, but actually talking to your relatives is for half-bloods, and with that Harry stormed off, wondering how on earth he had managed to keep a straight face through that entire exchange. One thing he knew, though, was that he definitely would have the twins' respect after they realized he'd tricked them. Hey, Mum, guess what? Guess who we just met on the train? Harry heard Fred say.
Who?
Molly asked. Draco Malfoy. That's nothing. I met Harry Potter, Ginny told him, still sounding awestruck. Why do you want to meet a git like him anyway? Ron asked. Meeting him wasn't the interesting part, George explained. Then what was? Ron asked. Apparently his mum and Snape were having an affair, and he's the byproduct. Fred exclaimed.
What?
Molly asked. This is much better gossip than last year's. Albus Dumbledore was madly in love with Gellert Grindelwald. Honestly, you'd think Rita Skeeter would learn to stop making up such sensational stories. Obviously, Dumbledore was struck speechless by the blatant lies and thus couldn't be bothered to deny it. It's true. He practically admitted it, George confirmed. I've got to go find Andromeda, Mrs. Weasley muttered. Be good kids. And with that she hurried away, Ginny trailing along behind her and casting longing looks back at the express. Anyone sitting here? Ron asked, entering Harry's compartment hesitantly. Nope, go ahead, Harry invited. Hey, Ron, George said, entering their compartment. Listen, we're going down the... Why are you sitting with Malfoys?
Malfoy.
Ron looked confused. You mean him? He gestured to Harry. Fred nodded. But that's not Malfoy. That's Harry Potter, Ron explained.
What?
Fred asked. But you told us you were Draco Malfoy. Harry shrugged. What can I say? Harry Potter, Draco Malfoy, sometimes I get confused. George, I think we've been pranked, George said. Our first year's allowed to do that. Fred wondered. Does that mean that what you said about Snape's not true either? It might be, Harry said neutrally. Feel free to spread the rumor in any event. Both twins' eyes lit up at this, and they ran off down the hall. Harry felt slightly guilty for doing this when he was planning on making a sincere effort to not make Draco Malfoy his arch-nemesis, because honestly, if he really wanted one that badly, there was always Voldemort, but then decided that since Draco had spread that same rumor about his mother and Snape, turnabout was fair play. You're my hero, Ron blurted out. Because of my facial disfigurement? Harry asked. No, because you pranked Fred and George, Ron explained. At Harry's incredulous look, he hastened to add, but your scar's pretty cool, too. Yeah, it was really considerate of Voldemort to give me such a wicked-looking scar when he attempted to brutally murder me as an infant, Harry said dryly. Ron just stared at him, fascinated and a little horrified. You really shouldn't say his name, you know. The more people tell me that, the less likely I am to actually listen to them, Harry remarked casually. Ron looked torn between the desire to impress upon Harry the importance of not saying Tom Riddle's silly little pseudonym and asking more about the night the two had met for the first time. Do you remember it? You do realize I was 15 months old at the time, right? Harry asked, raising an eyebrow. I know, Ron defended, although his tone of voice indicated that he didn't seem to really grasp that Harry was far too young to have even properly remembered the event, much less actually play some secret part in Voldemort's downfall. I just thought that you might remember, because of a scar. Now it was Harry's turn to stare. I'm starting to think that you people don't actually know anything about the way that scars work, he said, remembering how everyone had thought that his scar made him a lying schizophrenic fifth year. What do you mean, you people? Ron asked. Wizards, Harry explained. But you're a wizard, Ron pointed out. Yes, but I was raised by muggles, Harry explained. What does that matter? Ron asked. Harry smiled at Ron's inability to comprehend why it would matter. He was so innocent back then. Muggles don't have magic, and as such are forced to be much more sensible.
Oh.
Ron paused and looked expectantly at Harry. Harry sighed. And, to answer your question, yes, a little. What do you remember? Ron asked eagerly. That was the annoying part about Ron being so innocent. He tended to have the tact of a troll. He'd gotten much better at not asking such painful questions such as what he remembered about the first time someone attempted to kill him after he'd started dating Hermione. Well, Harry said, trying to piece together all the flashes he'd seen over the years. I remember someone who I assume is my father telling my mother to take me and go. Then there's laughing, someone who I assume is my mother begging Voldemort to spare my life. He tells her to stand aside and let him kill me. She says no and asks him to kill her instead. He does. Then there's a lot of green light, and my forehead felt like it was on fire, Harry explained. Now Ron looked horrified. I'm sorry, mate. I didn't think dash. It's okay. Harry cut him off. He really should have thought, but then again, he was only 11 and, knowing Molly Weasley, living the most sheltered life imaginable. Are all your family wizards? Harry asked, quickly changing the subject. Yes, I think so, said Ron. I think Mum's got a second cousin who's an accountant, but we never talk about him. Harry froze. He couldn't believe he'd never realized that the first time around, but to be fair, he was only a child at the time. Why not? Ron looked confused. What do you mean? Your accountant cousin, is he magicals? No, Ron replied, still not getting it. Is that why you don't talk about him? Harry asked. Clearly Ron had never thought about why they pretended they didn't have a squib relative. Just like how the Dursleys liked to pretend that they didn't have a wizard nephew. If the Weasleys of all people could succumb to pure-blood prejudices like that, no wonder Voldemort's only real opposition came from vigilante groups who functioned more like Albus Dumbledore's personal cult in his quest to atone for helping Grindelwald all those years ago. Still, the fact that Ron had never realized that his lack of magic was the reason they ignored their cousin was to his credit, and so Harry supposed he couldn't really take his frustration with the sorry state of the wizarding world where everyone was prejudiced against everyone out on him. Not to mention that it would completely destroy any chance they'd have of being friends. Has anyone seen a toad? Neville's lost one, Hermione said, entering the compartment, Neville trailing behind her. No, but you could always summon it, Harry suggested. I don't know the spell for that, Hermione admitted, sounding embarrassed that she didn't know how to do a spell that they didn't teach for several more years. Here, I'll do it, Harry volunteered, and took out his wand. Accio Neville's toad. Nothing happened for a moment, and Hermione looked doubtfully at him. Are you sure that's a real spell? Harry nodded. Oh, he was sure all right. Well, it's not very good, is dash, but she was interrupted as Trevor flew through the door. Oh. Ron looked over at Harry, surprised. If you knew how to summon his toad, why didn't you do it the first time he was here? Because he'd wanted to see Hermione again and hopefully make a better first impression? I guess I didn't think of it, Harry lied. I've tired a few simple spells, too, just for practice, and it's all worked for me. Nobody in my family's magic at all. It was ever such a surprise, but I was so pleased. Of course, I mean, it's the best school of witchcraft there is. Then isn't it convenient that it just happens to be the one geographically closest to where we live? Harry muttered. Hermione gave him a look. I've learned all our set books by heart, of course. I just hope it will be enough. I'm Hermione Granger, by the way. Who are you? I'm Ron Weasley, Ron finally managed to say after staring blankly at her for 3 whole minutes. Harry Potter, Harry told her. Are you really? Hermione asked curiously. What is it with people not having faith that I know my own name? Harry asked Neville, who just shrugged. And Hermione, I didn't know that I was a wizard until I got my letter, because my relatives refused to acknowledge that magic exists, and Ron was telling me that there are plenty of Muggleborns around, so I'm sure you'll be fine. Besides, I doubt that anyone else actually bothered to memorize all of the textbooks, so I think that not only is it enough, you're way ahead of everyone else. Really? Hermione perked up. Really? Harry confirmed. Although I did memorize our potions textbook, he admitted. Ron looked horrified at the thought of his potential best friend being a bookworm and scooted closer to Neville. But that's just because I heard that our teacher hated my dad, and I don't want to give him a reason to hate me, Harry quickly added. Not, of course, like Snape would need a reason, but at least he wouldn't embarrass him now with his first day surprise questions. Harry probably could have just looked up those specific questions, but then Snape might get mad and ask him some more. Not to mention that it had been years since his first class with Snape, and he honestly didn't even remember what the questions were or how many of them there were. Oh, that's okay then, Ron said, relaxing. You're in modern magical history and the rise and fall of the dark arts, you know, Hermione told him. Well, I wouldn't believe everything you read, Harry told her, a bit uncomfortable. Why not? Hermione asked. Because by this time tomorrow, the Daily Prophet and Witch Weekly will have probably run a story on how Draco Malfoy is Narcissa Malfoy and Severus Snape's love child, Harry told her. I'm afraid I don't understand, Hermione frowned. Who are Dash? Don't worry about it, Harry told her. You'll find out soon enough. I guess I should be going, now that you've found Trevor, Hermione said, getting up, Neville reluctantly following suit. Ron, being 11, didn't notice that they obviously wanted to stay, but Harry did, and his heart went out to his past and future friends. Hey, why don't you guys stay a while? We've got way too much food. We need some help eating it. Hermione beamed and sat right back down again. Thanks, Harry, Neville said quietly. A short while later, Draco Malfoy entered the compartment. Neville Longbottom, he proclaimed proudly. Yes? Neville asked, surprised. Not you, Draco told him. Him, he said, pointing at Harry. Sorry, Harry told him. But that's Neville.
Oh.
Was I close? He asked hopefully. How could you be close? I'm either a Longbottom, or I'm not. Which, for the record, I'm not. Well, you could be related to him, Draco pointed out. Harry snorted. I probably am, due to all the inbreeding. Draco chose to ignore that, partly because he wanted to find out who Harry was, as he had most likely spent the past month obsessing about it, and partly because it was true. Then who are you? That's Harry Potter, Hermione said helpfully.
Draco laughed.
No, really, who is he? Harry simply lifted his bangs up. Wow, you are Harry Potter, Draco said, sounding a little astonished. Yep, Harry said, vaguely recalling something from his first time around. Weren't people talking about that? Well, yes, Draco admitted. But they were also spewing the most ridiculous story about my being Professor Snape's love child. Really? Harry asked innocently. Wow, I guess people will believe anything. But Harry, Hermione looked puzzled. Didn't you already dash? Know that people will believe anything? Neville, surprisingly, cut her off, having figured out that Harry had started the rumor. Yeah, he did, but he's been a celebrity for years, so I suppose he would have. You're Draco Malfoy, then? Ron sniggered, his 11-year-old maturity level finding the new rumor about him hilarious. Fortunately, Draco misinterpreted Ron's amusement. Think my name's funny, do you? Or, Perhaps not so fortunately. No need to ask who you are. My father told me all the Weasleys have red hair, freckles, and more children than they can afford. Wow, that's oddly specific, Harry remarked. I take it that your fathers know each other? And are probably not on the best terms. Draco nodded. You be right, Potter. You'll soon find out that some wizarding families are much better than others. You don't want to go making friends with the wrong sort. I can help you there. Harry groaned inwardly. It was like Malfoy was trying to become his enemy, or something. Not, of course, that Harry could possibly consider an 11-year-old boy his enemy, but he knew that his school years would go a lot smoother with one less person out to destroy him. How to best handle this? He couldn't shake Malfoy's hand, of course, but that would give him the wrong idea and alienate everyone else in the compartment. But how could he not shake it and still get out of a pointless 7-year rivalry? Finally, he said, I'm sure you could, Draco, but the thing is, I'm still new to this whole magic is real thing, and so I'm not sure if I could really make an informed choice at the moment. You wouldn't want me to pick Ron just because we bonded over candy, and you thought I was Neville, do you? Draco considered. I guess not. And besides, I'd really like to at least make it to school before alienating anyone, Harry said diplomatically. So maybe at some point I'll decide that you're right. Ron is the root of all evil, and take you up on your offer of help. Maybe not. But in the meantime, I still need to figure out which of you is right. Bull, he knew exactly who was right and who he would ultimately choose if either Malfoy or Ron forced his hand. But it was a pretty reasonable thing for someone who barely knew either of them to say. All right, Draco agreed reluctantly. But you'll soon see that I'm right. And with that he left, the bridge unburnt. Chapter 3. So, where do you think you're going to be? Ron asked. I think I have a pretty good idea, Harry responded. I'm going to be a Gryffindor, Ron announced proudly. How do you know that? Harry asked. I mean, unless you're a lazy, traitorous idiot, you could end up in any of the other 3 houses. All my family has been in Gryffindor, Ron explained. So, do Gryffindor parents necessarily have to raise Gryffindor children? Harry asked, panicking slightly at the thought that Gryffindors being such horrible parents that their children would have to be brave to survive it. All my family's been in Hufflepuff, Ernie Macmillan volunteered. And you already know that my family's all been in Slytherin, Draco reminded him. So all 3 of you want to be in one particular house, simply because everyone else has been there? Harry asked. Yep, Ron nodded. Well, I hate to break it to you, but that sounds a lot like Hufflepuff loyalty, wanting to be in the same house as everyone else in your family, Harry said casually. Ron and Draco looked distraught while Ernie beamed. Although, Harry continued thoughtfully, wanting to be in a house that everyone trusts implicitly and always underestimates is brilliant, possibly Ravenclaw of you. Or else a great way to help your Slytherin ambitions along. Ernie growled at Harry, but was saved having to answer by his name being called. Fortunately, Malfoy didn't have much time to advance on Harry menacingly before his name was called. You didn't really mean all that, did you, Harry? Ron asked, his face white. I really want to be in Gryffindor. I'm sure you'll get in there, Harry assured him, feeling a little bit guilty for messing with them. Not very, because Draco usually had anything Harry felt the need to do to him coming. Well, except that whole attempted murder thing 6th year. But to be fair, Draco tried to Crucio him first, and in a little over a year Ernie would most likely be convinced that he was evil. Ron, however, still had a huge inferiority complex that Harry wanted to help with, not make worse. He didn't have much more time to ponder this, however, as his name was up soon. Potter, Harry, Professor McGonagall read off. Instantly, the whispers broke out. Potter, did she say? The Harry Potter? Now, Harry had had his fair share of notoriety in his first life and had had years to get used to the fame. Still, nothing quite compared to the first time a large group of people, particularly teenagers, had seen him. Yes, that's right, Harry said, stepping forward. The gossiping quickly died down, and the teachers looked at each other in slight surprise. Clearly, everyone had expected him to just passively encourage the rumors. As if. I am Harry Potter. If anyone asks me if I'm sure that I am, thus implying that I don't have the capabilities of any self-respecting 1-year-old, I will hex them. You have been warned. Now, Harry wasn't sure that he'd actually hex them, at least if they were a third year or younger. But it seemed like a good way to stop all of the non-stop questioning of his identity. And the horrified look on Snape's face was a nice touch. Although now, he probably just inadvertently confirmed that he was, in fact, James Potter reincarnate. Well, such is the life. Harry then walked over to the hat and placed it on his head.
The hat said.
Difficult. Very difficult. How is it difficult? You've already sorted me once. Yes, but now you've gone back in time to manipulate events in your favor, which is a very Slytherin thing to do. Good point. Except, for the whole, it was a complete and total accident part. Well, you're incredibly intelligent for someone of your age. Maybe you should be a Ravenclaw, the hat suggested next. Harry rolled his eyes. Actually, I'm rather average for someone of my age, so no, I shouldn't. Although I'll be damned if I let Hermione beat me as far as grades go. I don't care if she is a genius. I'm still 12 years older than her. The hat sighed. Fine, no Ravenclaw either. But since your loyalty, particularly to the Weasley family, who you seem to support no matter what they do, is astounding. What about Hufflepuff? Harry shrugged. Go ahead. I'll just transfer to Gryffindor.
Can you do that? The hat asked.
Another shrug. I'm the boy who lived pre-Dark Wizard rumors. I can decide who lives and who dies. Rather full of yourself, aren't you? The hat asked, annoyed at Harry's rejection of all other houses. A little, yeah, Harry admitted. But hey, isn't that a Gryffindor trait? And why are you trying so hard to put me in a different house? Well, what am I supposed to do? Just put you in Gryffindor because you want me to and because I did it once already? That's not how these things work, the hat explained. That's how it worked last time, Harry disagreed. Well, as I have no memory of the incident, I'm forced to speculate. You, as a terrified 11-year-old, had the nerve to argue with the being that decided the course of your life. Sounds like Gryffindor to me. What do you mean, course of your life? I thought it only affected Hogwarts. The hat chuckled, actually chuckled. Oh, please, do you really believe that? Name one Slytherin nobody thought was either evil or a coward. Or, occasionally, an evil coward? Harry didn't have an answer for that. Or take Ravenclaws. They're supposed to be incredibly inept and spend their whole lives studying, even when you're hit in the face of examples of this not being true, such as, from what I can tell of your experiences, Cho Chang and Luna Lovegood. Or Hufflepuff. They're supposed to be the house you go in when you don't have what it takes to be in any of the other houses, but Cedric Diggory was apparently the most qualified person in his year. What do they say about Gryffindor? Harry asked, highly amused. Cannon fodder. Harry snorted.
Typical.
I guess I kinda see your point, though. I mean, Hagrid basically told me that all dark wizards are Slytherins, even though he knew at least one golden boy Gryffindor became one, even if he does think it's Sirius, not Pettigrew. And you hear a lot about how so-and-so's family was all Slytherins, so of course they're all Death Eaters or, at the very least, pure-blood fanatics. And the Weasleys put so much stock in the fact that they're all Gryffindors that it's ridiculous. So you'll go in another house then? The hat asked hopefully. Sorry, Harry apologized. I really would, but I'd like to be with my friends again. Not to mention that Ron's too immature right now to consider being friends with a Slytherin. Fine, the hat grumbled. I suppose waltzing through the Veil of Death counts as being incredibly reckless anyway. Might as well put you with the other people who don't seem to be capable of thinking things through in Gryffindor. Predictably, his house gave him the loudest cheer yet, not suspecting that they'd just been insulted. Ron was quickly sorted afterwards. Well done, Ron, excellent, Percy said pompously. What do you mean excellent? Harry asked, feigning confusion. He got a Hogwarts letter. Of course they were going to sort him. I meant, good job getting into Gryffindor, Percy explained patronizingly. You mean that you would have been upset if he got into any of the other 3 equally noble houses? I would have thought you'd just be happy that he's going to be a wizard at all. Well, I am, of course I am, Percy quickly backtracked. It's just that it's better that he's in Gryffindor than in any of the other 3. I thought prefects were supposed to help promote inter-house unity. Harry scratched his head. Maybe I should ask Dumbledore how he plans to achieve that when his representatives among the student body insist on perpetuating house prejudices. Percy paled as the thought of what such a complaint would do to his chances to be head boy. Harry turned his attention to his fellow first years, just in time to hear Seamus ask, "How did he get covered in blood?" "I've never asked," came the ghost's delicate reply. Unless Harry was very much mistaken, the he they were referring to was the Bloody Baron. Now, he probably shouldn't divulge this, seeing as how it was obviously something they wanted to keep private. But then again, he never really liked the Bloody Baron or the Grey Lady. "I can tell you," Harry spoke up. Everyone turned to him. "And how would you, a first year, know a thing like that?" Sir Nicholas demanded. Harry shrugged. "Magic, eh?" No one could find a flaw with that answer, although if Harry wasn't careful, he'd have everyone clamoring after him to retake divination as he was obviously a seer. "So what happened?" asked Seamus. "The Grey Lady, who, by the way, is the ghost of Ravenclaw Tower, is actually Helena Ravenclaw, the daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw. I'm guessing being the daughter of the most brilliant witch of the time couldn't have been easy, and she developed an inferiority complex. Her mother had a diadem that was said to make the wearer wiser. Helena decided it was a good idea to steal the diadem and run off to points unknown with it. Her mother sent a former suitor of hers, the Bloody Baron, to go and retrieve her. Helena wanted to go back, was too proud, and so refused. The Baron lost his temper, killed her, realized what he did, went all emo, and then killed himself," Harry said, helping himself to some treacle tart. "That sounds like a bad soap opera," Hermione said, sounding affronted. "Are you sure?" "Hermione, didn't we already go over the whole asking Harry if he's sure thing when it came to my name?" "Well, yes, but you're more likely to know your name than something that happened over a millennium ago," Hermione asked reasonably. "Yeah, how would you know?" Dean Thomas asked him. Harry shrugged. "She told me." "Who, the Grey Ladies?" Nearly headless, Nick looked bewildered. At Harry's nod, he continued, "When's?" "7th year," Harry replied, making use of the amazing phenomena that was telling the truth, but having that truth be so incredible that everyone assumed you were joking. "Well, if you were lucky. If not, they tended to think you were a lying schizophrenic." "Well, if you didn't want to tell us, you could have just said so," Seamus told him. Eventually, the subject turned to families. "I'm half and half," said Seamus. "Me dad's a muggle. Ma'am didn't tell him she was a witch till after they were married." Bit of a nasty shock for him. The others laughed, but Harry frowned. It had seemed so amusing the first time around, but with what he'd heard of Snape's upbringing, because Eileen Prince had done exactly the same thing. "You're lucky," Harry found himself saying. Everyone looked over at him, confused. "You're lucky your dad took it so well. He could have easily panicked and left. Or stayed and resented your mother for lying to him and you for trapping him there. You're lucky that your father's a good man." There was an awkward silence for a moment, as no one quite knew what to say to that. Finally, Ron asked, "What about you, Neville?" "Well, my gran brought me up and she's a witch," said Neville, "but the family thought I was a muggle for ages." "Don't you mean a squibs?" Harry asked. Neville nodded. "My great-uncle Algy kept trying to catch me off my guard and force some magic out of me. He pushed me off the end of Blackpool Pier once. I nearly drowned, but nothing happened until I was 8. Great-uncle Algy came round for tea, and was hanging me out of an upstairs window by the ankles when my great-auntie Enid offered him a meringue, and he accidentally let go. But I bounced all the way down the garden and into the road. They were all really pleased. Gran was crying. She was so happy. Dear God, what a difference a mere dozen years makes in a person's perspective." "So, let me get this straight," Harry said, trying to stay calm. "You're basically saying that your family kept attempting to kill you in order to try and force you to do some magic? So, if you hadn't been a wizard they would have rather that you died? And your grandmother was so happy that you were magic, she completely overlooked the fact that if you hadn't managed to use magic, you would have died?" "Well, they wanted to know if I was going to be able to attend Hogwarts," Neville said timidly. Harry knew that this probably wasn't something that Neville needed to hear, but it was something that he needed to say. He remembered all too well the damage Neville's loving family had done to him, damage it took him years to get over. Harry also remembered Neville destroying the last bit of Voldemort's immortality and enabling Harry to win, and felt an intense wave of anger at the thought of what Neville's childhood must have been like. Because honestly, the Dursleys may have hated him with a passion and made that abundantly clear, but at least they never tried to kill him. If they wanted to know so badly, they should have checked the Hogwarts register. Granted, that was probably highly unusual and possibly against regulation, but Dumbledore would have made an exception if he knew that your relatives would attempt to kill you, Harry said coldly. And all that pressure was probably detrimental to any chance of you performing accidental magic. Basically, what I'm saying is that they really shouldn't have done that, you, Neville. Neville said nothing, but eyed him with an oddly speculative look on his face. Harry's classes progressed much as they did the last time, he supposed, except he knew how to perform all the simple first-year spells, and thus his teachers were torn between thinking he was a prodigy and thinking he was somehow cheating. Defense against the dark arts was a little different, though. Harry decided that while he wouldn't do anything that would make it blatantly obvious that he knew that Quirrell and Voldemort on the back of his head, that didn't mean he had to ignore what he had noticed the first time around, even if he had misinterpreted it. The minute Quirrell's back was turned to write on the chalkboard, Harry felt the familiar pain in his scar, or semi-familiar. He hadn't felt it in 6 years, after all, and he put his hand on his forehead and yelped. Everything all right, Mr. P.P.P. Potter? Quirrell asked. Your turban makes my scar hurt, Harry said bluntly. The Quirrell asked, looked panicked. The rest of the class just laughed, clearly not believing him. But he supposed that was better than them deciding he was crazy. In fact, maybe if he set it up like this now, there wouldn't be that Rita Skeeter fiasco when she found out about his dreams. You heard me, Harry told him. So, I would appreciate it if you could not have your turban completely facing me, as I think that would be more conducive to my learning environment. How does your scar hurt, Harry? Hermione asked skeptically. Wouldn't that be your foreheads? Harry shrugged. I don't know what to tell you, Hermione. All I know is that my scar hurts, not my forehead. How? Hermione repeated. Harry wasn't quite sure how to explain it, and so left it at that. Finally came the day he was most looking forward to, first-year potions as a semi-competent adult. Some would consider this cheating. Harry would consider having the potions teacher not have a personal vendetta against you as cheating. It evened out. Yes, were Snape's first words to him. Harry Potter. Our new celebrity. I'm sorry, sir. Is that your way of asking for an autograph? Harry asked innocently. He took the vein bulging in Snape's forehead to be a nope and continued, It's just that I only found out that my parents weren't drunken bums who died in a car crash a little over a month ago, so I'm very new to this fame thing. I appreciate how considerate you're being. Oh, now look, another vein. While Harry fully acknowledged that Snape was one of the metaphorical good guys, he also realized that the only possible chance of him getting Snape to like him died when the Sorting Hat proclaimed him a Gryffindor. Actually, he reflected he very well could make an effort. What was the fun if he didn't have anyone to bother? And, at least with Snape, everyone took a side. Potter. Snape's voice jolted him out of his musings. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Draught of living death, Harry replied matter-of-factly. Which is? Snape pressed. Professor, I'm not entirely sure why you're asking me questions to which you don't know the answer, but I'm pleased to inform you that I, a first year, know that it is a very powerful sleeping potion that makes it appear that you're dead. Of course I knew that, Potters. Snape snapped. I'm sure you did, Harry said, sounding slightly dubious. Well, I suppose everyone gets lucky once, something that you'd know plenty about, Potter. Snape muttered distractedly. Harry stared. Sir? Did you just compare me getting a potion's answer to correct to Voldemort attempting to brutally murder me after brutally murdering my mum and dads? Snape started, realizing he'd spoken aloud. Where would you look if I told you to find me a Bezoars? In the potions cupboard? Harry suggested. Snape's eyes flashed. Potter.
What?
You can't actually expect me to go out, find a goat, and extract a Bezoar from its stomach, can you? At this, Harry looked a bit scared. He had no doubt that Snape could very well expect that of Harry. especially if he continued to provoke him like this. What's the difference between monkshood and wolfsbane? Snape fired off another question. It's not very nice to try and trick me, sir, Harry said. And I know full well that they're the same plant. Although why they go by 2 different names, well, 3 if you count aconite, is beyond me. I suppose you qualify as competent, Potter, Snape said grudgingly, completely ignoring the fact that first years should not be expected to memorize their textbooks on the first day. Although that first question, when Harry was trying to get Ginny to forgive him for abandoning her after Dumbledore's funeral, he decided to send her a message in flowers and so got a book on Victorian flower language. If he recalled correctly, asphodel was a type of lily meaning "my regrets follow you to the grave," and wormwood means absence and also typically symbolized bitter sorrow. If you combine that, it meant "I bitterly regret Lily's death." Now, there's no way a normal first year would be able to get that, and Harry didn't even know if Snape meant to convey that, but it just seemed like too big of a coincidence. Out of all the potions Snape could have asked about, he chose that. "Thank you," Harry said quietly. Snape just nodded curtly.
Well?
Why aren't you all copying that down? Harry partnered with Ron and noticed that Neville was looking a bit pale. Hey, Neville, why don't you work with Hermione? After all, she's read the textbook a few times and so she probably won't mess up, Harry suggested. Hermione smiled at this, and the two moved over to the same table. And Harry was right. Hermione did know what she was doing, and Neville managed to avoid exploding anything this time around. He still cast Protego on himself, but that was more to get into the habit of it. Now that he knew how to protect himself from the various potions incidents, why not use it after all? Chapter 4. The morning of their first flying lesson had Harry a bit nervous. Not that he didn't know how to fly, of course, far from it. But the last time had been rather eventful. He wanted to get on the Quidditch team, but he wasn't about to just sit back and let Neville break his wrist. Granted, it didn't do any lasting physical damage, but it had deeply embarrassed him, and Harry didn't feel that he would be justified to let it all happen again just so that he wouldn't have to wait a year to join the team. And then there was the issue of Draco Malfoy to consider. Last time, he had stolen Neville's Remembrall, and the ensuing dominance battle between the two of them had earned him a place on the team. Harry had no doubt that Malfoy would pull the same stunt. The only difference was that he had to somehow repeat the catch without the accompanying hatred. It was possible that the event wouldn't take place at all, that Neville wouldn't fall off his broom. On the other hand, how was Harry supposed to prevent that? The best he could really do was a cushioning charm, which he vaguely wondered why Madame Hooch hadn't done the first time. Because, really, it's not like she could have realistically been panicked because Neville, no matter how incompetent he had seemed back then, couldn't have been the only one to have ever fallen off a broom. Perhaps she was a squib. He didn't think he'd ever seen her do magic. He supposed it didn't matter, though, since he, unlike practically everyone else in the wizarding world, honestly didn't care if someone was part house elf. And no, the reason he used house elves as an example wasn't prejudice, just simple logic as to the circumstances that would lead to a house elf and a human having a baby. He was jolted from his musing by Draco's arrival. Neville had just received his Remembrall and Draco had, as before, snatched it. Harry had never found Remembralls very useful, despite what other people said. After all, what was the point of knowing you'd forgotten something if the bloody ball never told you what it was? And for that matter, who hasn't forgotten something at any given point in time? Maybe it was like Muggle mood rings. Of course, those might have even been more pointless, because chances are you already knew what you were feeling, and thus didn't need a gaudy piece of jewelry to tell you. Ron jumped to his feet, clearly eager to start a fight. Oh, sit down, Ron. It's too early to fight, Harry complained. I mean, we haven't even finished breakfast. But Malfoy, Ron protested. Oh, he'll still be around later if you absolutely must engage in petty house pride bickering, Harry assured him. Ron looked a little cross at the dismissive mention of his apparent family feud with the Malfoys, but did as Harry asked. Harry briefly wondered why in the world the wizarding world still operated on a blood feud system, since most Muggle societies, and certainly all Western European ones, had outgrown generation-long grudges that nobody ever knew the meaning for, and that never ended until a person from both families fell in love with each other, or they killed each other centuries ago. Thank you,
Harry said.
So, what are you doing over here anyway? He asked Draco. Was Neville's Remembrall too shiny for you to resist? Well, I initially came over here to taunt Weaselboy about his broom quality, Draco informed him. Harry snorted at the double entendre, which flew way over everyone's heads except Hermione's, who looked a little disapprovingly at Harry and muttered, "Boys." Draco just looked at Harry strangely and continued. But then I saw this. Everyone knows that only losers need Remembralls. They went out of fashion at least 20 years ago. Clearly Draco didn't understand the appeal of retroness. But for that matter, Augusta Longbottom probably didn't know either. She was just old and thought toads were still in. Then why did you decide that you absolutely must have it immediately and couldn't have even asked Neville first? Harry asked reasonably. Draco trailed off, not sure how to answer that. Draco, are you a kleptomaniac? Harry asked him seriously. What the bloody hell is that? Malfoy asked, sensing he'd been insulted. A person who is compelled to steal for no adequately explained reason, Harry replied, remembering something Hermione had told him a few years back. Or it was something like that. It definitely meant stealing a lot. In fact, Harry could probably make a good case for Voldemort being a kleptomaniac. And Dumbledore, too, the items he kept from Harry because he wasn't mature enough for things his father had had since he was a child until after Voldemort was defeated. No, Draco insisted. Then I'm sure you won't have any trouble returning that. Harry smiled brightly at him. Malfoy huffed in annoyance. Fine, he said, handing the ball back and then returned to his table. Harry looked up and saw Professor McGonagall, watching from the staff table, gazing at the scene with approval. Oh, dear Lord, if Harry wasn't careful, they might actually make him a bloody prefect. And while it's true that Harry was upset at the time, he quickly realized that Ron being the prefect instead was rather nice, as he didn't have to be up at all hours patrolling the corridors in case any students fancied a midnight stroll. Seriously, you'd think that Hogwarts have a better security system, but no. That's not traditional. Tradition in the wizarding world, as Harry understood it, was just what they said when their hopelessly outdated ways were questioned and served as an excuse to continue doing what they've been doing since time immemorial simply because they've been doing it since time immemorial. Why do you put up with him? Hermione asked Harry once he returned his attention to the table. What do you mean? Harry asked. He hasn't actually done anything yet. And we've been here for over a week and a half, he added silently. Well, no, Hermione conceded. But he doesn't seem like a very pleasant person. Harry shrugged. Unpleasant people need friends, too, he pointed out. So you're taking pity on him? No. Harry shook his head. I might be nice to someone because I pity them, but I would never befriend someone because of that. In fact, it wasn't even guaranteed that he'd make an effort to be civil if Snape was any indication. Harry pitied the man immensely, and he couldn't imagine if Ginny chose to marry, say, Draco Malfoy, in true Romeo and Juliet fashion, and then he told Dumbledore something he'd overheard as a way to destroy Voldemort, and that ended up getting Ginny killed. And then if she had a child who, due to the recessive nature of red hair and the dominant nature of dark eyes, looked just like Malfoy with Ginny's eyes and having to teach him for 6 years, even though they both hated each other, and he'd had to live with the guilt of Ginny's death for 10 whole years prior to meeting the child. And Harry had heard that Draco was planning on naming his firstborn son Scorpius, of all things. Honestly, did that man have any sense? Still, it's not like Snape would actually appreciate any effort on his part and probably think he was patronizing him. So really, why not just enjoy the animosity while it lasted? Although note to self, should Snape, against all odds, be ordered by Dumbledore to assist in his suicide, tell Order that a Death Eater did it and then refuse to talk about it claiming trauma. So then why? Hermione pressed. I just think that life would be a lot simpler if I kept my list of enemies down to a bare minimum. Malfoy could probably do quite a bit to taint my Hogwarts experience if he so chose, and I know that he endorses Death Eater views, but he's 11. He doesn't really understand it. Besides, I've always wanted a friendly rivalry with someone, and he seems like he could be a fun rival, Harry explained. So, you don't really like him? Not really, but then, We've been here for a week and a half. I don't really know him.
And it was true.
Even after knowing him for 12 years, he still didn't. Fair enough. Now, what do you mean he supports Death Eaters? As in Voldemort? Hermione asked. Harry was a little surprised that Hermione used Riddle's chosen pseudonym, not the ministry-approved euphemisms, but then again, she'd only been really introduced to the wizarding world 2 weeks ago, so perhaps she hadn't gotten into the habit yet. Or ever, if Harry could help it. Draco's father is a Death Eater, Harry told her quietly. And his mother supports his pureblood ideologies in principle, but doesn't want Draco caught up in all of that. Then why didn't they arrest Mr. Malfoy if he was a Death Eater? Harry asked. Did I mention that St. Mungo's just happened to finally receive enough funding to build a children's wing right before Lucius was to have been tried? Harry asked innocently. Bribery? Hermione asked scandalously. Get used to it, Harry advised her. And what exactly is pureblood ideology? I mean, I've read up on the war, of course, and it's mentioned quite a bit in there, but it doesn't really go into much detail on what it is. They just assume that you already know, she told him. Harry sighed and ran his fingers through his hair. How best to explain? You'll find that blood purity, like many things in the wizarding world, makes no sense whatsoever. Wizards, of course, don't seem to notice this and continue to act like it's the gospel truth. It's basically the school of thought that only those who are pure-blooded have a right to be wizards and everyone else is inherently inferior. They won't actually give any reason as to why they think that, save occasionally someone mentioning that Muggle-borns live the first 11 years of their life in a completely different culture. Note that that is exactly like saying that someone who was raised in a different country is inherently inferior because they don't understand British ways. What is a pure blood exactly? I mean, I get the whole descended from wizards thing, but how far back does it have to go? Hermione asked. Harry grinned. Technically, it means that you have 4 wizarding grandparents. My grandparents on my mother's side were Muggles, so I'm known as a half-blood. Any children I have, though, will theoretically be purebloods, despite their Muggle-born grandmother. Of course, I'm sure that blood purists won't actually admit that she could possibly be a pureblood. For most people, I think it's if you know how closely related to a Muggle you are, you're too closely related to be a pureblood. How do they manage to keep from marrying Muggles or half-bloods? Hermione asked. I mean, there can't be very many proper pureblood families, can there? Nope, Harry smirked. In fact, they seem to die off all the time. Then how? Hermione trailed off, thinking.
Guess.
Oh, don't tell me they. Hermione trailed off again, looking slightly green. You know what? I think I have my own philosophy regarding marriage. If you know how closely related you are to someone, you're too closely related to date. Works for me, Harry agreed, making a mental note to never look up his or Ginny's family tree under any circumstance. Harry looked over in time to see Neville's broom take off. He was rising pretty quickly and Harry tensed, waiting for him to fall. When he did, Harry quickly and silently cast a cushioning charm. There was a loud thump as Neville hit the ground, but overall he seemed to be okay. Of course, try telling that to Madame Hooch, who insisted on taking him to the hospital wing anyway. None of you is to move while I take this boy to the hospital wing. You leave these brooms where they are, or you'll be out of Hogwarts before you can say, Quidditch? Come along, dear, she said and guided him back into the building. Oh, please, Harry said, wondering how he could have possibly believed that last time. The worst we'll get is a detention. Malfoy burst into laughter when he was sure that Madame Hooch was out of earshot. Did you see his face, the great lump? Shut up, Malfoy, Parvati snapped. Ooh, sticking up for Longbottom? Asked Pansy. Never thought you'd like fat little crybabies, Parvati. To be fair, it's not like he was crying, Harry pointed out. I don't think he was even hurt. How could he not be hurt? He fell 30 feet, Lavender reminded him. True, Harry nodded. But it's not like he hasn't fallen from great heights before without getting injured. Look, Malfoy exclaimed, spotting Neville's remembrall and rushing forward to pick it up. It's that stupid thing Longbottom's Gran sent him. I swear, Harry said, somewhat annoyed. What is it with you and that thing? I'm sure if you really want one that badly, your father can buy you one. Malfoy flushed. I do not want one. Could have fooled me. Harry muttered. Because it seems like you keep stealing Neville's, because you're jealous that you don't have an awesome magical mood ring. Draco looked confused at the end of Harry's statement, but quickly rallied. Nonsense. I just think that it's an affront to proper wizards when someone from such an old family has to rely on those. Pardon me, Hermione spoke up. But what do you mean by old family? Aren't all families equally old? Well, yes, Draco admitted reluctantly. But I meant old pureblood wizard family. Just checking. So you hope to cure Neville of his reliance on this, which, given he got it this morning, isn't exactly an issue. By doing what, exactly? Harry asked. Destroying it, Draco replied promptly. The sad thing is, you probably are trying to help him in a rather twisted way, Harry remarked. I probably can't force you not to destroy it, but we could bet on who gets it. What kind of bet? Malfoy asked, intrigued. Seeker competition, Harry explained. We could give the Remembrall to someone, and then have them throw it, and whichever one of us catches it wins, and gets to do what they like with it. And if no one catches it? Malfoy asked. Harry shrugged. Then it'll shatter, won't it? You're on, Draco agreed. Who'll be the judge, though? We'd need to find someone impartial. I'm thinking theater not, Harry said. You wouldn't trust anyone in Gryffindor, and I know that Not doesn't take orders from you, so I guess that's about as close to impartial as we're going to get. I agree, Not's a good choice. What do you say? Draco turned to Theodore Nott. Looking a little peeved at being dragged into this, Nott nonetheless nodded curtly and grabbed the Remembrall. Once the three of them were up in the air, Nott said, ready, set, go, and dropped the Remembrall. Harry and Draco, both on rather pathetic brooms, raced neck and neck to be the first to catch it. Draco didn't really want to catch the Remembrall, per se, as much as prevent Harry from catching it, and his pride wouldn't let him do anything less than his best. Finally, half a foot from the ground, Harry's hand closed over it just seconds before Draco's, and they both tumbled onto the grass. Nice flying, Harry complimented, knowing that losing in front of all of their classmates was likely to put Malfoy in a bad mood and make him say, or do something stupid. Thanks, Malfoy said grudgingly. You too? Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy. Professor McGonagall screeched. Malfoy looked a little green as the Transfiguration Professor continued to yell at them. Don't worry. Worst come to worst. We'll just get a detention and lose a few house points, Harry assured him. Hell, we might even get some recognition for our amazing flying. Draco perked up a bit at this. How dare you might have broken your neck dash. Well, unless it killed me instantly, I'm sure that Madame Pomfrey could fix it right up, Harry said cheerfully. Although it's nice to know that you care. Potter, Malfoy, follow me now, McGonagall instructed. First, McGonagall led them to the dungeons, where Snape was teaching sixth-year potions. Against all odds, the Slytherin captain, Marcus Flint, who ended up having to repeat his seventh year, unless Harry was very much mistaken, seemed to have qualified for Newt potions. Severus, a word. Snape and McGonagall went into his office to have a private discussion. My father is going to kill me, Draco announced. If you were going to get in trouble, she wouldn't need to get Snape involved, Harry pointed out. Then what could she possibly be talking to him about? Draco asked. I don't know. How's the Slytherin Seeker? Well, I heard the old one graduated last year, so they haven't found a new one yet, and you don't think? Draco trailed off, sounding incredibly hopeful. Harry shrugged. You never know. In fact, I'm nearly positive McGonagall's going to ask me. I heard that the Gryffindor team hasn't had a decent Seeker since Ron's brother Charlie graduated. But first years aren't allowed to have their own brooms. And you brought yours anyway, Harry pointed out. Still, that rule probably precludes us from playing, Draco said, sounding disappointed. In most circumstances, yes, but I'm Harry freaking Potter. Of course they're going to make an exception. What about me? Draco asked. They'll have to let you play, too, so it looks like I'm not getting special treatment, Harry said. Shortly after, Snape and McGonagall left the office, and Flint was called out into the hall. Flint, Malfoy will be playing as Seeker, Snape informed him, without ceremony. Harry gave Draco a look that said, see? Draco just nodded, thrilled. and he didn't even have to bribe his way on this time. With that, he and McGonagall left to go find wood. Chapter 5. That night passed quite peacefully as Draco wasn't actively trying to get Harry expelled, and Harry didn't see any particular reason to go and wander about discovering what he already knew about the Philosopher's Stone. Of course, that might make it harder to explain to Ron and Hermione why he felt the need to go to the corridor on the 3rd floor that Dumbledore had mentioned involved dying a horrible, painful death. Then again, he wasn't even sure if he should involve them. Last time, he hadn't had any choice because he wasn't capable of getting through there alone, and his friends knew all about Voldemort and the stone anyway. This time, he was technically a legal adult, and dragging 2 11-year-old children along with him to face Voldemort seemed highly irresponsible. Come to think of it, considering that Quirrell had no chance in hell of getting the stone from the mirror, did he even need to bother going down there? But if he didn't, would Quirrell return to teach the next year? Well, any teacher, even a possessed one, would be better than that pompous Git Lockhart. Having Voldemort at Hogwarts while his Horcrux was running around attacking people would probably be a very bad idea. He'd need to give this more thought. His musings were interrupted by the arrival of the Daily Post. More specifically, by the 2 broom-shaped packages that required 6 owls each to lift. One broom went to Harry at the Gryffindor table, the other to Draco at the Slytherin. Harry raised his broom at Malfoy in a cheers gesture, which the other boy returned. Harry quickly scanned the card. It's a good thing that Professor McGonagall warned me not to open this broomstick-shaped package at the table. After all, something that is shaped exactly in the form of a broom can be so many, many things. Harry muttered sarcastically. What? Does she think I'm stupid or something? Or, more accurately, everyone else? Ron glanced over at the card to see what he was talking about. A Nimbus 2000. Ron moaned. I've never even touched one. Well, at least now I know what to get him for Christmas, Harry thought wryly. He wondered briefly why he hadn't thought to do so the first time around. Sure, first years couldn't have their own brooms at Hogwarts, but nobody actually listened to that anyway. And if Ron complained, as he was wont to do, about accepting charity, Harry could simply point to the Weasley sweater he hoped to receive. After all, Molly had sent it to him because Ron told her that he wasn't expecting any presents, and if that wasn't charity, what was? Not that he minded. He'd have done anything for some charity in his early years, particularly when he was still at the Dursleys. After breakfast, Harry headed back to the common room alone as Ron had chosen to stay behind and confront Malfoy about the blatant favoritism, which really meant that Ron wished that the school would buy him his own broom, and was cornered by Hermione. I suppose you think that this is a reward for breaking the rules. No, I think that this is a reward for me being ridiculously good at Quidditch. Harry paused. And, because my parents were brutally murdered. You talk about that a lot, Hermione noted. Harry grinned. Yeah, so does everyone else. I'm just trying to keep up. I still can't believe that you were rewarded for risking your life. Harry nodded, his expression serious. I know. I mean, they were never going to expel me for something like that, but at the very least I should have lost some points and gotten a detention. I realized that what I did was reckless, but you have to understand that Draco, despite his inability to hold his broom the right way, knows what he's doing. I'm apparently a prodigy, although I had no way of knowing that at the time, but if I got hurt, it would have been my own fault, and I would have taken responsibility for it. I guess what I don't really get is why it matters so much to you.
Why?
Because you could have gotten seriously injured. What more reason do I need? Hermione asked him. Harry laughed. Hermione, this is a magical school, and not a particularly safe one. People get grievously injured on an hourly basis. Horrible injuries are just something you're going to have to get used to, and I think you know this. So, what's the real reasons? What do you mean? I think this has more to do with the fact that we broke the rules and you seem to hold them as sacred, Harry theorized. Hermione reddened. I do not. It's just that rules are put into place for our protection, and as such we should follow them and not flaunt our disregard for them. That is true, Harry acknowledged. Sometimes, maybe even most times. But I won't follow pointless rules. If I feel that something has been put in place for my own protection, then yes, chances are I'll follow it. No promises, though. and I won't purposely endanger any fellow students. Occasionally, I may do something stupid like this. I probably shouldn't, but then again, I'm 11.
Technically.
You've got to cut me some slack. I suppose I can if you really mean it about being more careful, Hermione agreed. So we're friends again? Friends. Hermione repeated, looking dazed. Great. Harry smiled, pretending not to realize why his use of the word friends had gotten to her so much, as her magic and her intellect had always made her a bit of an outcast, and he could certainly sympathize, and proceeded to his dormitory. And was it strange that seeing his broomstick again had been just like seeing a long-dead friend again? The morning of Halloween, Harry received an unexpected letter. Well, the letter was unexpected because he never got mail, but the handwriting was downright shocking. Sirius. Quickly, Harry tore open the letter, wondering how in the world Sirius had managed to send him an owl from Azkaban. Unless, but no. He hadn't done anything drastic, like getting sorted into Slytherin, for Sirius to break out for, so how could the timeline have possibly been moved up? Dear Harry, I realize that you've probably never heard of me. Or, at least I hope you've never heard of me. If you have, it's all been pretty vile, I imagine, and you'll soon hear it at any rate. Most of it is a pack of vicious lies. Know my use of the word most, because you'll have to remember that I was a teenager at one time. When you reach puberty, you'll understand. Anyway, I thought you'd like to know that I'm not actually a mass murderer. I am not nor have ever been a supporter of Voldemort, and I'm your godfather. Surprise. Here's to hoping that since I broke out during the year, they won't subject you to the horrors of Dementors. Sirius Black. Ex-con extraordinaire. Harry snorted.
Typical.
Bloody hell. Apparently, Sirius's escape had made the Daily Prophet again. Harry leaned over to Percy. Hey, when you're done with that, do you think I could borrow it? Certainly, Harry, Percy replied, and 20 minutes later, handed him the paper. Thanks, he said absently. Sirius's story was on the front page, and it was by Rita Skeeter. This ought to be good. Black Escapes Azkaban. By Rita Skeeter. Sirius Black is widely known to be the most infamous prisoner ever held in Azkaban. The question of why, however, has yet to be answered. Yes, Black killed 13 people with one curse. On the other hand, 12 of them were muggles, which even the most inept wizards can accomplish, and the 13th was one such inept wizard. Black's allegiance to he who must not be named came as a great shock to many, and it is easy to see why. Black was certainly not a member of one of the most prominent dark families in Britain, after all, nor was he implicated in an attempted murder when he was 16. Despite the questionable nature of Black's reputation as infamous, given that Azkaban also houses noted prisoners as Black's cousin, Bellatrix Lestrange, who was convicted for, among other things, torturing Oris Frank and Alice Longbottom into insanity, and who took down 18 of the 24 Aurors sent to capture her. 3 facts remain. People are terrified of Black. No one has ever broken out of Azkaban. Black broke out of Azkaban. Despite its reputation as being impenetrable, perhaps there ought to have been a contingency plan in place. When questioned, Minister of Magic Cornelius Fudge had no comment, but did insist that, "We are doing all we can to recapture Black, and we beg the magical community to remain calm." When pressed, Fudge admitted that they had not yet worked out a plan, although since Black escaped mere hours ago, a plan will likely soon emerge. In the weeks before Black's escape, he was known to mutter in his sleep about that greasy git and gotta go back to Majorca. Who exactly is this greasy git, and is Black actually heading to Spain? Only time will tell. Harry snorted. Rita Skeeter was really quite amusing when she wasn't hell-bent on destroying his life. Still, he wished she hadn't thrown in that part about Neville's parents. He'd have to talk to Draco and see if he could convince him to get the other first years to lay off of Neville. The older years were generally too busy harassing each other to worry about them, so Neville wouldn't have to deal with much. Although really, what kind of 11-year-old taunted someone for having their parents tortured into insanity, especially when the taunters were actually related to the perpetrators? Harry arrived at Charms quite pleased. Draco, still shocked and thrilled that he, along with Harry, was the youngest Seeker in over a century, still felt immensely grateful to him and agreed not to mention Neville's parents and to stop the others from doing so. In fact, he'd even gone so far as to tell Harry not to do something stupid like going after Black when he was a fully trained wizard and psychotic killer, while Harry was a first year, which was a far cry from the "I'd want revenge if it were me" of the first time around. The students were all whispering about Sirius when Harry arrived, and some shot him curious looks, clearly aware of how Sirius and Harry's father were best friends. Harry briefly wondered why no one had said anything about Sirius supposedly betraying his family to Voldemort, but then he realized that that wasn't exactly common knowledge and, what's more, not technically a crime. Granted, it was morally reprehensible, but you really couldn't prove if someone was under a Fidelius charm nor who the secret keeper was. Additionally, Harry could safely assume that most secret keepers were more trustworthy than Wormtail, and so the only way they would betray someone would be through torture, and cracking under torture isn't exactly something one should be punished for. Once class started, Harry didn't bother practicing Wingardium Leviosa as he already knew it, and instead divided his focus between helping Seamus with it and watching Ron and Hermione. When Hermione levitated her feather perfectly and got points, and Ron started looking angry, Harry quickly levitated his feather over to Ron and began tickling him. Needless to say, Ron was very irritated with Harry by the end of class. "Why in the world did you feel the need to torture me with that thing?" "Because I was bored and it amused me," Harry told him. "And you got it so quickly. Like Hermione, but at least you didn't go rubbing everyone's face in it. It's not wonder no one can stand her. She's a nightmare, honestly." Harry groaned. Good God, Ron was obnoxious at that age. "You're just sore that she corrected your pronunciation. But if she didn't, you never would have gotten it by the end of class. I guess," Ron admitted grudgingly. "And I'd like to invoke the same rules I have concerning Draco, where Hermione is concerned. Namely, no bad-mouthing my friends in front of me. After all, I don't let Draco say anything unless you're there to defend yourself." "All right?" Harry asked seriously. "Fine," Ron sighed. Harry turned to look at Hermione and saw there were tears brimming in her eyes. "Thank you," she mouthed. Harry just smiled. At the Halloween feast, Harry made sure to eat as quickly as he could in anticipation for the troll attack. He knew they'd continue the feast upstairs afterwards, but it somehow wasn't the same. Sure enough, 20 minutes into the feast, Professor Quirrell came sprinting into the hall and gasped out, "Troll, in the dungeons. Thought you ought to know." What was his reason for being absent in the first place? Everyone else was there. And for that matter, how could he have explained why he was in the dungeons? And did he just leave the doors open and hope a troll would come wandering in? He'd never seen any in the Forbidden Forest. There was really no conceivable way this could have been an accident. "Great going, Quirrell. Prefects," Dumbledore roared. "Lead your houses back to the dormitories immediately." If Harry didn't know for a fact that the troll wouldn't really be there, he'd have pointed out that the Slytherin dormitories were in the dungeons. Although how to explain how he knew? "So," Harry said brightly, "I'm feeling reckless, and thus I'm going to go looking for the troll. Who's with me?" Everyone at the Gryffindor table looked at him like he was crazy. "We're in," one of the Weasleys said. Percy looked aghast. "Fred, I suppose I'll have to go to make sure you don't get yourself killed," Hermione sighed. "Although for the record, this totally counts as endangering others." "If she's going, I'm going," Ron said, eager to prove that he was just as good a friend as Hermione. Neville, who was also feeling reckless due to the article mentioning his parents, nodded that he was going. Percy looked longingly at the staff table. The teachers had already left to go to the dungeons. He turned to one of the other Gryffindor prefects and instructed them to get the Gryffindors back safely while he chased after his brothers and their friends. Harry, meanwhile, quickly left the Great Hall, the others hurrying behind him. He soon reached the girls' bathroom, taking care not to pass by Snape heading to stop Quirrell from getting past Fluffy, and stood outside of it. "Excellent, my troll senses seem to be working," he beamed once he heard the troll inside. The Weasleys, Neville, and Hermione did not look nearly as excited. "Are you sure this is a good idea, Harry?" Ron asked, looking a bit green. "Of course," Harry nodded. "I mean, we're just a couple of schoolchildren about to face off against a fully grown mountain troll." What could possibly go wrong? And with that, Harry headed into the bathroom before the others had a chance to reply. I suggest we use Sectum Sempra, Harry said as the others followed him in. Except Ron and Neville. You guys do Wingardium Leviosa and drop his club on his head. Do you think I can do that? Ron asked. Positive. Harry grinned and fired the cutting curse at the troll. The troll's thick hide meant that it did not do nearly the amount of damage it would have done had the target been a human, but it still split its arm open. Behind him, the twins, Percy and Hermione, also cast Sectum Sempra and did quite a job distracting the troll. Good thing, too, as it was taking Ron and Neville a while to levitate the club, and once he did, even longer to move it over the troll and drop it. Wow. George said. Keep this up, Dash. And we might actually dash. Admit we're related. Even Percy looked impressed. Well done, Ron. Ron's ears turned pink, and he looked very pleased. Nice, Neville, Harry complimented. A sudden slamming and loud footsteps made them all look up. A moment later, Professor McGonagall, along with Snape and Quirrell, burst into the room. Quirrell took one look at the troll, let out a faint whimper, and sat down, clutching his heart. Harry rolled his eyes at the Dada professor's theatrics. Snape bent down to examine the troll while Professor McGonagall glared at them, looking angrier than she had when she caught Harry and Draco playing Seeker. What on earth were you thinking of? Demanded McGonagall, with cold fury in her voice. You're lucky you weren't killed. After you guys left, I decided I wanted to go looking for the troll. I was upset after hearing that Sirius had broken out of prison. Mostly just because he didn't understand why it happened so early, but then no one said he had to be specific. Neville was feeling the same way because of what the article had said about Bellatrix, but he wouldn't have done anything if I hadn't have gone, and he didn't want me to go alone, and the others went with me so as to stop me from getting killed. Percy did try to dissuade me, but once I left he had little choice but to follow me and had another prefect take the rest of the Gryffindors back. Harry was laying it on a little thick, but he didn't want to get the others in any trouble. Well, in that case, Professor McGonagall said, staring at the three of them. Potter, you foolish boy, how could you think of tackling a mountain troll on your own? Harry shrugged. I wasn't really thinking of that so much as how one of my father's closest friends could have been a Voldemort supporter and mass murderer. McGonagall looked away, no doubt thinking about the fact that said friend, although it was Peter, not Sirius, had also been Harry's family's secret keeper. Potter, 5 points will be taken from Gryffindor for this. I understand your frustration, but you should not take pointless risks like this. As for the rest of you, you each win Gryffindor 5 points. Now, if you're not hurt at all, you'd better head back to Gryffindor Tower. Students are finishing the feast in their houses. They hurried out of the bathroom and back to the tower. You do realize that you're insane, right, Harry? Hermione asked him. And that we got extremely lucky, and by all rights should be dead right now. Harry shrugged. I got us 25 points. Why are you complaining? You're right, Ron said, coming up to stand by Hermione. He is mental. Harry smiled. There was nothing like a little near-death experience to help forge a friendship. The others hurried off to go get plates, and Harry was about to join them when a thought struck him. He knew what had happened now, why things had changed. Sirius had also fallen through the veil. Chapter 6. As much as Harry wanted to find a way to contact Sirius, after all, he hadn't seen the man in 8 years, and with Sirius, at least, he didn't have to pretend to be a near stranger. Unlike everybody else he'd met again, he knew that he couldn't. Not yet. He wouldn't put it past Dumbledore to monitor his mail once he learned of Sirius's escape. Not to be nosy or anything, but to keep Harry safe from what he thought was a huge threat. And at the Dursleys, where he had no one to monitor him 24/7, it would be even worse. No, Harry would have to wait until Sirius contacted him. The problem being, of course, that Sirius had no way of knowing that Harry knew all about what had really happened with Pettigrew and those muggles and the secret keeper switch. And yes, he would have to return to the Dursleys, at least this year. After all, he really had nowhere else to go, and Mrs. Weasley had the unfortunate habit of taking Dumbledore's word as law. Harry also couldn't just go up and capture Pettigrew now for a number of reasons. not least of all that he had never taken the time to learn how to cast the spell to reveal an animagus. As a first year, he really should know what an animagus was and, given his lack of contact with any of his father's old friends, had no way of knowing that Peter was a rat, and even less cause to think it was Scabbers. If he took this up with an adult, they wouldn't believe him, and Scabbers would probably move on to another wizarding family, knowing his cover was blown. No, as vexing as it was, he'd have to wait until he heard from Sirius again. Shortly after the incident on Halloween, which, of course, just invited more staring but did also have the unexpected side effect of convincing Fred and George that Percy wasn't a lost cause after all due to his part in their little escapade, was Harry's first Quidditch match. He wasn't really nervous as Draco Malfoy, though admittedly quite talented for an 11-year-old and the best Slytherin house had to offer, had nothing on him. He could fly circles around Ginny back when she was on a professional Quidditch team. Harry wished he had joined one instead of becoming an Auror straight away, but then again, it was right after the fall of Voldemort, and he felt like he had a moral obligation to help round up all of his followers. Maybe this time, if he could end the war quicker or if he was sufficiently brilliant/lucky, prevent it from taking place at all. Then he could play all the professional Quidditch he wanted before he reached 30 or so and had to retire, to become an Auror. Come to think of it, becoming an Auror while in possession of the world's most powerful and death-attracting wand probably wasn't the best plan, was it? The game started off innocently enough. Draco and Harry flew around aimlessly, searching for the snitch. Harry hoped he'd be able to catch it before Quirrell thought to jinx his broom, but fate did not seem to be on his side. The second he did spot the snitch, Flint slammed into him, and one of the twins shot a bludger at Draco. Naturally, in the confusion, the snitch disappeared. A few minutes later, to Harry's great annoyance, his broom started lurching. Harry groaned.
He'd forgotten about that.
Now, if he didn't do something quickly, Ron and Hermione would jump to conclusions about Snape, and Harry really didn't want to set the precedent of blaming Snape every time anything went wrong. Not to mention, he didn't want to have to actually start defending Snape until he absolutely had to, as he really didn't like his potions professor, and so saying nice things about him made him nauseous. Petty, perhaps, but Snape was worse. The best thing to do would be to start a counter-curse and hope that his and Snape's combined efforts would be enough to stabilize the broom. Unfortunately, counter-curses to such things as bewitched brooms had been the sort of thing he'd resolved to look up later, and so that was out. He could take his chances that Snape could stop Quirrell, but he vaguely recalled Quirrell saying something about how he only needed a few more seconds to knock Harry off his broom when Hermione knocked him over. And come to think of it, why in the world would Quirrell try such a public and clearly not accidental method to kill him?
Idiot.
Well, if the two obvious answers were out, Harry might have to try something slightly unconventional. He saw the snitch down below him, to the left but heading his way. If he timed this just right, Harry stood up and jumped off his broom. There were gasps all around the stadium. It was clear that Harry had done this on purpose. As Harry fell through the air, he could only hope he'd reach the snitch before someone thought to do something to slow him down, like Dumbledore did that time Dementus crashed that Quidditch game he had against Hufflepuff in his 3rd year. Which was another reason why Quirrell was an idiot. There was no way people would just let him fall to his death. Really, why did he even bother? Sure enough, Harry started to slow down.
No.
He was so close. Desperately, Harry twisted himself into a position to make him fall faster. Closer, closer there. Harry's hand shot and grabbed the snitch. He chanced to look over at Snape, who rolled his eyes at the fact that Harry was obviously more concerned about winning than landing uninjured. He was the only one who seemed to have thought to slow Harry down, though, so Harry supposed he should be grateful. He was definitely going to do everything in his power to make sure that Snape survived Voldemort's second bid for power and didn't become one of the most hated wizards in Britain. Well, not any more than he already was among those who didn't appreciate his unique style of teaching. Seriously, didn't they have a seminar all potential teachers had to attend or something? Harry landed gently on his feet. That surprised him. He'd expected Snape to just let him fall when he was close enough to the ground to not get hurt. Then he remembered that Snape was rather bad at flying and figured he landed on his ass 1 or 2 times too many for him to do it to Harry. Triumphant, Harry held up the snitch. Within seconds, he was mobbed by the rest of his team. "Good game," he managed to tell Draco as he was being dragged away to Hagrid's hut by Ron, Hermione, and, surprisingly, Neville. "I really lucked out that the snitch just happened to be right in the path of my fall." "Huh?" "It was Snape's," Ron declared, once at Hagrid's. "Hermione and I saw him. He was cursing your broomstick, muttering, 'He wouldn't take his eyes off you.'" "Rubbish," Hagrid insisted. "What would Snape do something like that?" "Doesn't Snape do all that whenever we have potions?" Neville asked. Harry laughed. "Yeah, I do tend to provoke him a bit." At Hermione's look, he amended, "Okay, a lot. But he's not going to try and kill me for it, and he definitely isn't stupid enough to try anything in front of the whole school. He'd probably try to poison me." "But Harry, I know a jinx when I see one. I've read all about them. You've got to keep eye contact, and Snape wasn't blinking at all. I saw him," Hermione said urgently. "Even if you ignore the fact that, as Neville pointed out, that kind of behavior is par for the course when Snape sees me, Snape was probably trying to stop me from falling off. I mean, he may not be a very good teacher, but he's not so bad as to actively try to murder his students. Besides, he was the one to slow me down when I jumped off, so I didn't break anything." Hermione crossed her arms. "Okay, I'll bite. If it wasn't Snape, who was cursing your broom?" "Quirrell." Hermione's eyes bulged out.
What?
"That's even less likely than it being Snape," Hagrid added helpfully. Ron just stared at Harry. Neville was the only one who thought to ask, "Why do you think that?" "I mean, Professor Snape is much scarier and evil-looking than Professor Quirrell." "Exactly," Harry nodded. "So, if it's that obvious that he's evil to a bunch of first years, Dumbledore would have probably picked up on it." Harry paused. Dumbledore did have the slight tendency to be optimistic to the point of foolishness. Or at least Professor McGonagall. But wouldn't he have to trust Quirrell, too, since he's also a teacher? Hermione asked. Harry shook his head. "Nah, it's Quirrell's first year. Plus, I talked to some of the older students, and it turns out that there's some sort of curse on the position." Hermione looked skeptical. "A curse on a job?" Harry shrugged. "Well, how else do you explain that nobody's lasted longer than a year for 40 years? Hermione didn't have an answer, so Harry went on. "And it can't be Snape, because his turban doesn't make my scar hurt." Hermione rolled her eyes like, "Oh God, not this again." "But Snape doesn't wear a turban," Ron said, confused. "Exactly. Quirrell does though, and I've learned that people in turbans are not to be trusted." "How many people have you met who've worn turbans, Harry?" Hermione asked him. "Well, only the one," Harry admitted. "But he just tried to kill me. So maybe your problem isn't with the turbans, it's the fact he tried to kill you," Hermione said pointedly. "You may have a point," Harry admitted. "It's not like I think the turban itself is evil, just it's hiding an evil entity underneath it. Which I'm nearly sure doesn't apply to anyone else wearing a turban." "Nearly sure?" Ron asked. "You can never be too sure," Harry said mysteriously. "Although, I mean, Quirrell has a turban. Quirrell tried to kill me, so the transitive property would state that dash." "I swear to God, Harry," Hermione interrupted. Fine. I will be responsible about this," Harry said, sighing. "Turbans are fine. It's not the turban's fault Quirrell is evil. But I will not concede to being responsible on anything else, just so we're clear." "I know how to pick my battles," Hermione replied. "And to answer your question, Neville, while we all know that Snape hated my father with a passion and seems to think I'm James Potter reincarnate, he hasn't once mentioned my mother. He's insulted me on everything else in my life but her, which seems strange. Do you have any idea why Hagrid, who was looking more uneasy at the second at the thought of Hogwarts professors hired by Dumbledore out to kill Harry, brightened immediately. "Oh yeah, they were great friends, your mum and Snape. At least till that fight at the end of their 6th year." "Then why does he pick on you so much?" Neville asked. "Well, I look like my dad, right? Apparently, I have my mother's eyes, though, and have you ever noticed he never makes eye contact with me? Besides," at this Harry grinned, "it's not like I don't give as good as I get." The next month just flew by, and Harry was surprised to wake up one day and realize that it was almost Christmas. He really needed to get a move on with those Christmas gifts. He also paid the Weasley twins 10 galleons apiece in order to have snowballs constantly following Quirrell around and bouncing off the back of his turban, where Harry knew Voldemort was. They didn't want to accept that much money at first, but then Harry explained that by constantly he meant until the snow melts. They'd even managed to prevent the snow from melting inside and vanishing whenever any other teacher was nearby.
Pure genius.
One day, after potions ended, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and Neville, who still persisted to hang out with them, which Harry thought was odd, but then he was used to a trio. Maybe it was time to get used to the idea of a quartet? Even Ginny hadn't managed to really join them once she and Harry had started dating, but then Ginny had started trying in their 6th year, not first, happened by Hagrid on their way to the Great Hall. "Hi, Hagrid. Want any help?" Ron asked, figuring it was the polite thing to do even if he wasn't exactly sure how to help. "Nah, I'm all right, thanks, Ron," Hagrid replied, realizing the same thing. "Would you mind moving out of the way?" Malfoy asked impatiently. "Are you trying to earn some extra money, Weasley? Hoping to be a gamekeeper yourself when you leave Hogwarts, I suppose. That hut of Hagrid's must seem like a palace compared to what your family's used to." Harry met Neville's eye, and they both moved forward to hold Ron back as he started to lunge at Draco. "And just how would you know what Ron's house looks like?" Harry asked. "Are you some sort of stalker?" Draco looked surprised.
What?
"Of course not. I don't know, it kind of sounds like you are. What do you think, Ron?" Harry hoped that by involving Ron in a verbal battle they could avoid a physical one. "I think you're right," Ron agreed, still straining against them but starting to calm down. "Besides, didn't we already have this discussion about how not everyone can be manor lords?" Harry asked. "Honestly, you'd think the scion of wealthy pureblood families would have a better long-term memory." "Oh, I know," Neville agreed. His short-term memory had improved dramatically since getting away from the pressure of being expected to live up to his parents' legacy by his well-meaning but misguided relatives and finding friends who didn't keep comparing him to them, and Harry had even gone out of his way to criticize the way his relatives had piled those unrealistic expectations on him his whole life. He was still scared of Professor Snape, however, who was at that very moment coming up behind Malfoy. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked silkily, eyeing the still struggling Ron. "Nothing much," Harry said brightly. "Just a friendly discussion on whether or not all the inbreeding affects one's memory." "Then how do you explain Mr. Weasley's?" "Well, Ron's a pureblood, so he got kind of offended," Harry explained. "Why wasn't Mr. Longbottom equally offended?"
Snape asked.
Harry looked to Neville. "I often wonder the same thing myself," Neville said, thinking quickly. "Merlin knows I've had my share of memory problems over the years."
He paused.
"Or at least I think I have." Snape looked to Malfoy, who remained quiet, not wanting to admit that he'd provoked them when they hadn't even responded properly, and so the potions professor just shook his head. "Move along, all of you. I am going to kill him," Ron announced. "Make sure you at least do it after he does something to deserve it," Hermione advised, knowing there was little sense in trying to reason with him when he was like this. "And anyway, Neville, that was brilliant." He blushed. "Thanks." On Christmas morning, Harry woke up to a larger stack of presents than he'd expected. Of course, it was still much smaller than he was used to, but he was fairly certain it was bigger than he had received his first year. "Merry Christmas," Ron said sleepily as he stumbled over to his pile. "You too," Harry replied, picking up the first present. All in all, it was a good haul. He got a wooden flute from Hagrid, a 50-pence piece from Aunt Petunia, which he gave to Ron, death threats from Uncle Vernon, no doubt for his parting words at the station, a Weasley sweater and fudge from Molly, chocolate frogs from Hermione, his father's invisibility cloak from Dumbledore, pranking 101 from the twins, a broom servicing kit from Draco, and a photo of his mom and dad, along with Frank and Alice, from Neville. Harry was especially happy with the last present. Yes, this was a much better haul than before. Harry looked up at the sound of Ron gasping. "Harry, is this what I think it is?" "That depends," Harry grinned. "On what exactly you think it is." "A Nimbus 2000, Ron breathed. But Harry, I don't even—" "Don't worry about it," Harry told him. "Your mother made me a sweater because you knew my relatives wouldn't bother, and I got you a broom so you can have an advantage when you're playing the twins because they are good." Ron looked torn between accepting the gift and bristling at what he still considered charity. Finally, his desire to have a top-of-the-line broom for once in his life won out. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Hey, what are friends for?" Just then, the door flung open and Fred and George bounded in. "Merry Christmas. Thanks for the book on becoming a Nimigus. Most people just get us books on pranks dash, which are nice dash. But you can't rely too much on those dash, as great pranksters must always be original." Harry smiled. "Don't go rushing things and getting hurt, but see if you can manage it before you graduate." "You're on," they agreed. In addition to Ron and the twins, Harry got thick woolly socks for Dumbledore, anonymously, of course, a book on herbology for Neville, hair care products for Draco. He really wished he had a camera to see the look on his face, although he clearly used something on his hair. Hogwarts a history for Hermione, so she wouldn't have to keep checking it out. A sickle for the Dursleys in return for the 50 pence. And the Monster Book of Monsters for Hagrid, since he already knew he would enjoy it. "What's all that noise?" Percy asked, sticking his head into the doorway. His brothers, who had been in the middle of discussing their sweaters, looked up at him.
P for prefect.
"Get it on, Percy, come on, we're all wearing ours." "Even Harry got one," Fred said. "I guess she didn't hear the real story behind the troll." "Huh?" George added. "I don't want dash," Percy protested as the twins forced the jumper over his head. "And you're not sitting with the prefects today, either," said George. "Christmas is a time for family." And with that, the five headed down to Christmas dinner. Strange, though, Percy didn't seem to be nearly as reluctant to spend time with them as he wanted them to think. Chapter 7. There weren't a lot of people staying for the holidays, but it was certainly more than had stayed during his second year. Harry elected to sit by a pretty blonde witch who looked like a 6th or 7th year. "Hi," Harry greeted. "Do you mind if we sit here?" "Watch her, Harry," she greeted. "And no, I don't mind." Harry froze. She looked nothing like her, but her voice sounded so familiar, and she had used her trademark greeting. "Tonks?" he asked uncertainly. She cocked her head at him. "Do I know you?" "Not exactly," Harry admitted. "But I took it upon myself to research my godfather's family members after he broke out of Azkaban." "Family members?" Fred asked, staring at Tonks. "Godfathers?" Tonks repeated, staring at Harry. Harry nodded. "Yep, my godfather is none other than one Sirius Black. You're his cousin, right?" "My mum is," Tonks explained. "That's why I'm here. Given the sheer number of Azkaban inmates I'm related to, my mum has always had policy where every time one of my Death Eater relatives breaks out of Azkaban, I have to stay at Hogwarts where it's safe. Needless to say, this is the first time we've actually had to put this into practice." "You're related to Sirius Black?" Ron asked, stricken. Tonks eyed him critically. "You're a Weasley, right?" At Ron's nod, she continued. "You are too, just not as closely related." Ron looked faint. "Of course, you're not as closely related to Sirius as you are to Draco," Harry added, smirking. Ron groaned. "What do you know about me?" Harry asked, curious as to what the other houses made of him this time. Tonks snorted. "Please, everyone knows you." "But what do they say about me?" Harry pressed. "They say you have a death wish," Tonks responded cheerfully. "Is it true that you went chasing after a full-grown troll because you were bored?" "Well, kind of," Harry said sheepishly. "But if anyone asks, it was because I was so distraught that Sirius escaped that I wasn't thinking clearly." "Personally, I think you're just nuts," Tonks offered. Harry nodded. "That works, too. Just don't tell the prophet. I've got a good thing going here, being able to do or say whatever, because everyone seems to idolize my forehead, and I wouldn't want anything to compromise that." "I promise," Tonks laughed. "So you're 7th year?"
Percy asked.
"Yeah," Tonks confirmed. "I'm a Hufflepuff. So you can tell me all about OWLS." Percy said excitedly.
"Here he goes again," Fred sighed.
"He does this whenever he talked to someone who's already taken them," George confided. "The week we took OWLS was the worst week of my life," Tonks declared. The twins exchanged glances. "You know, we could really use all the help we could get," George began. Tonks groaned. "That girl was strange," Ron commented as they made their way back to the common room that evening. "Yeah, she is," Harry agreed. But I like her.
So do I.
That was the most productive meal I've had in quite some time, Percy said happily. She looked like she was really regretting letting us sit down, Harry noticed.
Why?
Now Percy was confused. Some people don't enjoy discussing exams they took a year and a half ago at Christmas, Fred told him. But you only let me ask her about them for 20 minutes, Percy protested. Because she was looking homicidal and we were feeling generous, George explained.
What?
Percy began. Ron tapped Harry on the shoulder. Hey, mate, can I talk to you for a second? Sure, Harry said surprised, and they headed up to their dormitory, ignoring the three older Weasley brothers' continued debate about the merits of rehashing exams. Ron stared at the ground, looking extremely uncomfortable. Listen, I know you must have spent a fortune on my present, and I know I didn't get you anything. I'm sorry about that, and I feel really bad, but I don't have any money. I know you're not the type to flaunt your wealth like Malfoy and some of the others, but it's pretty obvious that you have money. I couldn't afford to buy anything. Mum had to make the sweater and fudge she sent you, and, well, what could I have possibly gotten someone like you?
Poor Ron.
It's not like Harry was trying to make him insecure, but he had been a little blasé about the ridiculous amount of fame and fortune he possessed, having been long used to it, and used to Ron being long used to it, too. It made sense that he was a little overwhelmed. Harry put a hand on his best friend's shoulder. Ron, look at me. Ron did, reluctantly. You gave me your friendship when I had no one. The only other person I even knew was Hagrid, and he had to be nice to me. He was a representative of the school and knew my parents. You didn't have to be, and even though it took a bit, you remain one of the only people here who can see past my scar, and you have no idea how much that meant to me. It didn't seem like it. You've been nothing but confident since the moment I met you, Ron countered. Well, technically this was true, but really only because of Ron and Hermione the first time around. Ron, you saw what my relatives sent. Enough money to buy a small piece of candy and death threats. I've never had anyone until I met you, and that's more important than any broomstick. Do you mean it? Ron asked hopefully. Of course, Harry smiled. But I will be expecting something for my birthday. July 31st, write it down. Ron laughed, and they headed back downstairs to play wizard's chess. Hey, Ron. Harry shook him awake early that morning. Quite early, in fact, as it could barely be called morning. Tap dancing spiders. Ron shouted as he shot up, knocking Harry to the floor.
Huh?
You're not a tap dancing spider. No, I'm not. Harry gritted his teeth. And what are you doing on the floor? Oh, nothing. I just wanted to know if you wanted to use my invisibility cloak to go find a magic mirror. Aren't most mirrors magicals? Ron asked skeptically. This one shows you things you want, not lectures you about your appearance, Harry explained. Sure, why not? Ron said, rubbing his eyes as he headed for the door. Unfortunately, he misjudged the distance to the stairs and fell down all of them. Fortunately, the first-year dorms were the closest to the bottom. Watch your step, Harry called a little late as he grabbed his invisibility cloak and hurried to Ron's side. What was that? Sounded like a cannon. The Weasley twins appeared on the scene. Oh, it's just Ron. What are you guys doing? Professor Dumbledore finally got around to giving me my father's invisibility cloak back after he felt the need to borrow it for the last 10 years or so, and so Ron and I decided to go looking for this kick-ass mirror Dumbledore has around here, Harry explained. Wanna come? The twins stared at him incredulously. Do you even need to ask? The twins tended to do the whole twin-speak thing a long less around Harry, since he could actually tell them apart. Of course, he hadn't seen fit to mention that was because he cast silent identifier spells at them every time they entered the room, but hey, they were bloody identical and enjoyed confusing people. He was really just leveling the playing field. What's the meaning of this? Percy came down the stairs. It's long past curfew, and even though that doesn't technically apply to the common rooms, it's far too late to be up and about. You're not planning on sneaking off somewhere, are you? He asked suspiciously. Of course not, Fred assured him. Percy still looked skeptical. Harry is though, and he just invited us, George beamed. And may I just say that I am so proud. Ron, this one is definitely a keeper, Fred told him. You can't just dash, Percy began. It's the holidays, I don't have classes tomorrow, and there is nothing you can do short of hexing me that will stop me, Harry interrupted. I'll tell Professor McGonagall, Percy threatened. So I'll get a couple of detentions, that's not exactly enough to deter me. My relatives would be thrilled to hear I'm doing my utmost to get myself killed, and I honestly do not give a damn about house points. Really? Ron asked, wide-eyed. Really? You see, I've come to the conclusion that the house cup is really more of a suck-up cup. After all, the more of a teacher's pet you are, the more points you win. God knows I love Hermione, but she has got to be the biggest teacher's pet I have ever met, and guess what? She's the single biggest point winner in our year. I don't care as I lose Gryffindor all of our points because, quite frankly, I don't want to be a sycophant all year just so the Great Hall gets to be decorated in our colors for one meal and you get an entire train ride's worth of bragging rights. It's just not worth it, Harry concluded. Harry, my good friend, George began. You might be onto something, Fred finished. And by the time you'd find McGonagall, we'd be long gone. So how about it, Percy? Would you really stoop so low as to hex a first year? Harry challenged. I know, Percy said, defeated. But I'm coming with you to make sure you don't do anything stupid. Percy paused. Well, anything stupider than this, he amended. Harry shrugged. The more the merrier. You're lost, aren't you? Ron asked as they walked past the same portrait for the third time. No, I'm not, Harry insisted. But we've been past here, Ron countered. I know what I'm doing. He's lost, Fred said. I can't with them. George trailed off as a door appeared in front of them. That door wasn't there a minute ago, Percy said, peering intently at it. I know. It's a magic door, Harry explained. Come on, let's go. Harry opened the door, and they all went in. In the center of the room was a huge mirror with an elaborate golden frame and standing on 2 clawed feet. The inscription read, Eri stra eru oit ubek hafru oidon wosi. What the hell does that even mean? Ron asked. Harry shrugged. Beats me, I always figured it was some obscure language that only really old people with nothing better to do with their time understood. I know it's called the Mirror of Erist. There was a moment of silence, and then Percy said slowly, I show not your face, but your heart's desire. That's great purse dash, said Fred. But what does that have to do with dash? The price of dragon's eggs dash. In France? George asked. Percy rolled his eyes. It's obviously backwards. Obviously, Fred mimicked. Really? Harry asked, looking closer at the inscription. I show not you're right. That's amazing. It wasn't that hard, Percy said, but he looked pleased. So, take a look, Harry invited. He looked in the mirror and saw Ginny holding a baby with messy black hair. Ron and Hermione stood next to her holding Teddy's hand. What do you see? Ron asked, hesitant to step in front of the mirror without knowing what to expect. My family, came the quiet answer. I see our own joke shop. George exclaimed. Sweet. I do too. And I see Angeli, that's really a nice joke shop, said Fred, looking a little embarrassed. I see myself as the head boy and the Quidditch captain, Ron announced. Grand plans, Harry remarked. Can you even be the head boy and Quidditch captain at the same time? The twins looked mildly ill at the prospect of yet another head boy wannabe in their family, and Percy looked thrilled at the thought of someone following in his footsteps. When Percy finally stepped in front of the mirror, he gasped. Minister of Magic? Fred asked. Probably, George agreed. Harry didn't think so, though. He sidled up to Percy and spoke quietly. You see your family accepting you? It wasn't a question. Percy looked startled. How did you dash? Not all dreams are impossible, Percy. Harry's life soon settled back into a monotonous routine, or as monotonous as anything ever was since Harry had decided on a devil-may-care approach to his second chance, until one Quidditch practice where Oliver would announce that Snape would be referring Gryffindor's next match against Hufflepuff. Harry had forgotten about that, but it wasn't really very big in the grand scheme of things. What did interest Harry was the fact that this would provide him with his first opportunity to approach Cedric since he arrived. Granted, reacquainting himself with Tonks, for he did make an effort to see her whenever he could, was a complete and total accident and a result of Sirius's decision to escape while Tonks was still at school, but he found he rather liked seeing her again after all these years. He hadn't been nearly as close to Cedric, but his death had a profound impact on him too. That certainly sounds like a bit of a conflict of interest, was Harry's only comment. You'd think they'd have a teacher who wasn't a head of house be the referee if they weren't going to use Madame Hooch. Of course, the why of the matter eluded him. Was this yet more evidence pointing towards Madame Hooch being a squib? Though Harry wasn't quite sure how much being up in the air with him would help Snape stop another attempt, especially as he'd need to actually pay attention to the going-ons for the other players. Shouldn't you be a little more concerned about the fact that he's going to blatantly cheat? Wood asked. Well, I would, but the referee can only do so much, and the 150 points I get when I catch the snitch will definitely help on our way to the cup. And besides, since he's doing it for me, I'm kind of obligated to be a bit, dare I say it, grateful. Harry shuddered at the thought. Everyone stared at him. Harry, I don't quite think that Snape George began. Is going to be blatantly biased towards Hufflepuff for your sake Fred continued. Unless you have money on them or something, George ended. Harry rolled his eyes. Oh, please. And he's doing it to make sure that Quirrell doesn't try to kill me again. That set off a whole new round of questions. When Harry had finally finished answering everyone's questions and changed, 45 minutes had elapsed. Honestly, it was like a bloody press conference, he reflected wryly as he headed to Gryffindor Tower to tell Ron and Hermione the news. He had just finished convincing Ron that his safety was, in fact, more important than a Quidditch game, and he couldn't always jump off of his broom, or else it would get old. When Neville showed up. Hey guys, he said cheerfully. You'll never guess who I just ran into.
Who?
Hermione asked. Malfoy. And you're happy about this? Ron couldn't believe it. Bloody hell. First Harry, now Neville, stay strong Hermione. Don't give in to his temptation. Hermione giggled. I'll try not to, Ron. So, what happened? Harry asked, for once the one to bring everybody back on topic. He vaguely remembered a conversation like this, but Neville had been much more upset. Oh, right. Well, I ran into him outside of the library, and he said he'd been looking for someone to practice on, Neville explained. He shot a leglocker curse at me. And this makes him happy, Ron remarked. Either Neville's got some strange preferences, or Malfoy's spell is stronger than I thought. Hermione ignored him. What did you do? Dodged it and ran like hell, Neville grinned. Nice, Harry approved. You should have hexed him back, Ron told him. No, he shouldn't have, Hermione said, scandalized. Would you have wanted to just stand there and face off by yourself against Malfoy and his 2 half-troll bodyguards? Neville asked rhetorically. Harry finally managed to place the situation. You're worth 12 of Malfoy. He echoed his words of 12 years prior. And don't you forget it. Chapter 8. The day before the match, Harry was flying around the Quidditch pitch idly when he saw Cedric Diggory on the ground, holding a broom and watching him. Spying on me? Harry asked as he landed. Cedric shook his head. Hardly. And I've already seen you play, remembers? You go to matches you're not playing? Harry asked, surprised. Cedric stared at HM. Of course, it's helpful to see how the other team flies. Are you saying you don't? Harry shook his head ruefully. Well, I would, but I always get so frustrated whenever I spot the snitch, and the seekers are oblivious. It's really not good for my blood pressure. You could always watch the other players, Cedric suggested. I could, but unless one team has scored 15 more goals than the other players don't matter all that much in the outcome of the match, so I never really see the point, Harry confided. Seeker bias, Cedric laughed. I completely understand. Good, Harry said, relieved. Everyone else thinks I'm crazy. From what I've heard, you are. We haven't been properly introduced, have we? I'm Cedric Diggory, he said, sticking his hand out. Harry Potter, Harry replied, shaking his hand. First Tonks, now you. Does everyone here think I'm crazy? Pretty much, Cedric said cheerfully. That's not necessarily a bad thing, though. Hogwarts and the wizarding world in general have been stuck to the status quo for far too long, and it's about time someone came and shook things up. even if I'm sure your motives are far less noble. So, why are you out here then? Harry asked, trying to get one more practice in before the match tomorrow. Sort of. This is my first year on the team, and you're Harry Potter and insanely good at flying and don't mind jumping off your broom to catch the snitch, and I'm just not sure that my sanity's damaged enough to let me pull the kind of stunts that you probably will to win. Nymphadora eventually got so tired of watching me pace that she kicked me out of the common room. Wow, Harry said, his eyes wide as saucers.
What?
Cedric asked. How did you get her to let you call him Nymphadora? I've been trying for weeks and I haven't had any luck. More like years, but no need to tell him that. Cedric laughed. She lost a bet last year. And before you get any ideas, she's vowed to never again let the use of her first name be a part of a bet. Because she lost once? Harry complained. That's not fair. Twice, actually. Charlie Weasley apparently won a bet with her 4 years ago and wanted the same thing.
Damn.
There goes that plan. The next day, Ron, Hermione, and Neville wished him luck outside of the locker rooms, clearly wondering whether he'd survive the match. Oh, relax, guys. Not only is Snape not out to kill me and on hand to make sure nothing goes wrong, but given what happened last time, Professor Dumbledore will probably be here as well. I'll be fine, he assured them. You thought last time went fine, too, and you ended up jumping off of your broom, Neville pointed out. So? We won, Ron and Harry said at the same time. Hermione rolled her eyes. Just try and be careful, okay? I'm always careful, Harry assured her as he headed into the locker room. I was afraid he was going to say that, Hermione said, gazing worriedly after him. Unfortunately for Harry, he didn't find the snitch as easily as he had the last time he played this match. He supposed that made sense. Finding the snitch in 5 minutes had been a rarity once. Doing it again in the same match 12 years later, well, for him, anyway, was downright impossible. He looked over at the stands and saw Ron and Neville taking on Draco, Crabbe, and Goyle and briefly wondered what that was about. Oliver had only let 3 goals in while they had scored 8. At around 40 minutes into the game, he noticed the snitch hovering around his ear. Feeling slightly anticlimactic, he reached up and plucked it from the air. Game over. In the weeks that followed, Hermione had begun to obsess about the exams, which were still 2.5 months away. She had tried to get Ron, Neville, and Harry to follow the schedule she had drawn up for them, but even though Neville found her methods quite helpful, Harry had refused outright. Quite apart from his 12-year advantage placing him at the top of the class, no one ever actually failed first year, and given some of the older students at Hogwarts, that was really saying something. In fact, Harry didn't quite think that it was possible to fail until 5th year, and he had, in fact, not even taken the exams 4th year, so they couldn't be that important. Needless to say, Hermione was not pleased to hear this, but there was really nothing she could do to make Harry study, so she harped on Ron twice as hard. Still, his friends were constantly doing homework, and everyone in the castle, it seems, was studying for exams, and so he spent far more time than he'd like to in the library. On one such afternoon, he was flipping idly through the pages of Quidditch Through the Ages when he heard Ron call out, "Hagrid, what are you doing in the libraries? Looking for a book to read?" Harry suggested. I mean, what else would he possibly be doing in here? Hitting on Madam Pants? Just looking, Hagrid confirmed. Unless I miss my guess, you just came from the dragon section, Harry said casually. And don't even give me that look, guys. I'm spending more time in here than I am sleeping. I need something to occupy my time. You could try studying, Hermione suggested, but Harry ignored her. You wouldn't happen to be looking into raising a dragon, would you? Harry asked innocently. Wait, you don't actually have a dragon, do you? Neville asked quietly. I mean, that would explain why you're keeping all the windows shut and a fire going despite the fact that it's spring. How would you know that? We haven't been down to see him in a couple of weeks, Ron pointed out. Oh, well, I'm helping Professor Sprout out with the greenhouses, and I always say hi to Hagrid while I'm down there. The past 4 days, though. Neville trailed off. So are you? Maybe, Hagrid admitted. Hasn't that been illegal for, 200 years? Harry asked. Technically. That settles it, Hermione said, putting her books in her bag. We're going to go down and see this. Even though Ron didn't particularly want to go and stare at an egg in a virtual inferno, he was pretty excited to be doing something other than studying, and he quickly gathered up everyone's things. I can't believe it. I just can't believe it, Hermione was muttering as they followed Harry back up to the castle. How could he be so irresponsible? He lives in a small, wooden house and has no means for providing a safe and adequate environment for a baby dragon, not to mention their illegal dash. Where are we going? Ron interrupted her. I don't know about you, but I'm going to go see Professor Dumbledore, Harry said. You're going to tell him about Hagrid? Neville asked. At Harry's nod, he continued, but won't he get in trouble? He might, Harry admitted. But Dumbledore's always been good at covering up things that go on at the school, and I'm sure he can come up with a perfectly reasonable explanation as to why we have a baby dragon on our hands. But Hagrid's counting on us. Ron protested. True enough, Harry nodded. On the other hand, Hagrid, as much as I love him, seems to be almost completely lacking common sense, and I think we can all agree that the dragon has got to go. We're 4 11-year-olds. This really can't be our responsibility. The best thing to do in this situation is to turn it over to the responsible adults who should be taking care of this, and that means going to Professor Dumbledore. Bertie Bott's every flavor beans. Wow, first try, he remarked as the gargoyles guarding the headmaster's office sprung aside. Harry's? Professor Dumbledore looked up, surprised, as his office was invaded by 4 first-year students. Miss Granger, Mr. Weasley, Mr. Longbottom? What are you doing here? Harry noticed that despite the fact that they'd never actually spoken in this timeline, mostly because first years didn't really have much cause for interacting with the infinitely important Albus Dumbledore, but partly because he wasn't quite sure what to say to the man, even now, 7 years after his death. Or 5 years before, however you looked at it, Dumbledore used his first name. Interesting. Well, Professor Dumbledore, Sir, Harry here wanted to see if you could, help with a problem we have, or discovered, really Hermione was clearly flustered to be speaking to the headmaster of Hogwarts and head of the Wisengamot for the first time. Harry decided to put her out of her misery. Hagrid found a dragon egg, and he doesn't seem to understand that it's not legal or safe for him to raise it, especially at a school. We were hoping that, seeing as how we're 11 and you're a responsible adult, you'd take care of it. Dumbledore peered at him over the top of his half-moon spectacles. You're certain of this? Harry bit back a smart remark. He really would prefer to not have to deal with this personally, so he'd have to make a real effort to be respectful. Yes, sir. I see. Well, I must commend you for bringing this straight to me. Most students, I've found, tend to take care of these sorts of things alone, which can end badly. 5 points to Gryffindor for each of you for your wisdom in getting a teacher involved. As soon as they were back in the hallway, Harry groaned. Oh, great. At this rate, we'll never lose the House Cup. Most people wouldn't see this as a problem, Harry, Hermione told him, confused. But I do because it's the Suck-Up Cup, remember? When Hermione shook her head, Harry continued, Oh, right. You weren't there. Either way, I believe that the House Cup is a school-wide conspiracy to try and spawn as many teachers' pets as they can and encourage teachers' pet-like behavior in everyone. Snape and I are doing all we can, but we can't lose Gryffindor the House Cup alone. Hermione just stared at him. You have problems. The exams were, of course, ridiculously easy. Flitwick wanted them to make a pineapple tap dance across a desk, and he made it tap not only across the desk but on the floor, up the wall, and on the ceiling too. McGonagall wanted them to turn a mouse into a snuff box and, after complaining, as he always did, how inhumane it was to turn living creatures into inanimate objects, his was jewel-encrusted. Snape wanted them to brew a forgetfulness potion with no directions, and Harry did it with his eyes literally closed. Not to mention how he did on the written tests. Honestly, first-year end-of-the-year exams just weren't written for 23-year-olds, no matter how little they actually paid attention in class. The night the exams finished, the trio plus Neville, Harry had never really liked the term quartet. It always reminded him of an orchestra for some reason. Were sitting in the common room, enjoying the fact that exams were over. Still, events being as they were, Harry would have to destroy the peace. So, Harry said casually, My scar told me that Professor Dumbledore's in London right now, and Quirrell is taking advantage of his absence to go after the Philosopher's Stone.
What?
Ron, who had been drifting off, sat up, suddenly wide awake. Philosopher's Stone? There's a Philosopher's Stone at Hogwarts? Hermione asked, her voice higher than usual. Well, yeah. I mean, what else do you think is in that one third-floor corridor we're forbidden to go to under pain of death? Harry asked rhetorically. Why would anyone hide something like that in a school full of children? Neville asked sensibly. Harry laughed. That is a damn good question. The fact remains that he did, though, and I get that I should have probably mentioned this before now, but I'm going after Quirrell and nothing you can do will stop me, so I was wondering whether you'd like to come with me or stay here and hope I don't get killed. 20 minutes later, after Hermione tried everything she could think of to convince him to stay, or at least give a better reason for why he was going, the four of them were heading out the portrait hole. Where are you going?
Percy demanded.
Don't you know it's past curfew? Harry smiled pleasantly. Oh, I know. I just don't care. We are so going to get expelled for this, Hermione grumbled as they made their way towards the third-floor corridor. Oh, we will not, Harry disagreed. We're only breaking one little rule. I mean, we may die. But they can't possibly expel us because they're stupid enough to think putting dark wizard bait in a school full of children is a good idea. Honestly, who's there? Peeves said, coming from around the corner. Know you're there, even if I can't see you. Are you a gully or ghosty, or we student beastie? Should call Filch. I should. If so, anything's creeping around unseen. Hiya, Peeves, Harry said brightly, pulling the invisibility cloak off of him, but leaving it to cover the others.
Potty.
Peeves asked. What are you doing? Causing mayhem, Harry said. I'm endangering myself and 3 other students by sneaking off to the third corridor. Is that irresponsible enough for you to let us go on our way? Peeves considered. This would be the corridor that Dumbledore said if you go near, you'll die? Yep, Harry confirmed. Well, all right, Peeves agreed. Got your conch, he shouted before zooming off.
Ow.
Harry said, rubbing his nose. Don't even laugh, guys. When they did reach the door to the third corridor, it was already open. Harry was surprised. They'd left an hour or so earlier than last time. How early did Quirrell leave?
Oh well.
Now guys, don't panic or anything, but there's a giant 3-headed dog in there, Harry said cheerfully. A what? Ron asked, clearly panicking. Oh, don't worry, Harry said. It also instantly falls asleep whenever it hears music, and I brought the flute Hagrid got me. Harry entered the room, his friends reluctantly trailing behind. He played the flute and watched as first Neville, then Ron, finally Hermione jumped through the trapdoor. He then, still playing, jumped through himself, wondering idly how in the world they were going to get back up. Oh well, that wasn't his problem, that was Ron and Hermione's. By the time he landed, he discovered that Neville had already gotten rid of the devil's snare. Harry supposed it paid to have a genuine herbology prodigy with them this time. After all, having a plant try to kill you was highly embarrassing. They moved on to the next room where they found hundreds of flying keys and a few old broomsticks. Yeah, I'll deal with this, Harry said, taking his Nimbus 2000 out of his pocket and unshrinking it. Do you take that with you everywhere? Hermione asked him incredulously. Yep, Harry nodded.
Boys,
she muttered, giving him a disgusted look. Harry took off and, 2 minutes later, had grabbed the key and landed. He jammed it in the lock and completely ignored the odd silence behind him. So he was quite possibly the best flyer in Britain. He'd had years of practice. It wasn't all natural talent, not that they knew that. Then they reached the chessboard. Harry groaned. He hated chess. He was also incredibly bad at it, probably worse than an 11-year-old Ron, so there was really nothing to do but sit back and wait for the game to be over. When it was, and Ron lay crumpled on the floor again, seriously, it's like Ron was masochistic or something. Hermione, Neville, and Harry hurried on to the next room, trying not to think too much about the blood pouring out of Ron's head. He was fine before, he'll be fine now, Harry tried to reassure himself. It wasn't very comforting. They walked through the room with the unconscious troll and continued to Snape's potions puzzle. The 3 of them read Snape's riddle, although really, Wouldn't it just make sense for Snape to simply tell Professor Dumbledore which bottle was which, and then not let anyone else have any idea? And Hermione began walking up and down the aisle, tapping bottles and muttering to herself. Harry was pleased to note that he figured out which bottle was which a good 3 minutes before Hermione did. It really did pay to have dozen-year head start sometimes when dealing with someone as brilliant as Hermione. So, right. There might be enough for 2 of us to get through to face Quirrell, but definitely not for 3 of us. I'm going in, of course, and I'm guessing you won't let me go in alone, so I suggest rock, paper, scissors. After trying to explain to Neville how to play, Hermione chose scissors and Neville, not really grasping the concept, picked rock. Hermione, overthinking this as usual, decided that Neville wouldn't pick rock twice in a row, and so picked scissors again. Unfortunately, Neville did indeed elect to go with rock, and she was sent back to go deal with Ron and Dumbledore. Even though I won, Hermione gets the better deal, Neville grumbled. Oh, cheer up, it'll be fun, Harry told Neville, pouring half of the bottle into his hands. Fun? Fun? Facing down an evil teacher is your idea of fun. Yep, Harry nodded. Hermione's right, you do have problems. Harry beamed before downing the rest of the bottle. Chapter 9. Wait, what? Neville blurted upon crossing the fire. It really was Quirrell? Damn. Now I owe the Weasley twins money. You were betting on who was out to kill me? Harry asked. Isn't that a bit morbid? Oh, like you're one to talk. You bring up your facial disfigurement, as you call it, every chance you get, Neville pointed out. Harry shrugged. Yeah, well, everyone seems to love talking about it, so I figure I was doing them a favor. And at least the Weasley twins had faith in me. Before Neville could answer, Quirrell spoke. I wondered whether I'd be meeting you here, Potter. I must say, I didn't expect to see Longbottom, though. Harry looked confused. Why were you wondering whether you'd see me? I'm bloody 11. I really should have more sense than to go after a fully trained wizard who wants to kill me armed only with some of my first-year classmates. Although if he were really 11, it probably wouldn't have occurred to him to force an adult to listen after getting the brush off from McGonagall. God knows it hadn't last time. He really should have been more specific about why he thought the stone was in danger. Gee, I don't know, Quirrell said sarcastically. Could it be the fact that every time I face away from you, you insist that your scar is on fire? Harry opened his mouth to answer, and then abruptly closed it again. Fair point, he conceded. I must say, I didn't honestly expect you to figure it out considering Sirius seems so much the type. I mean, who in their right mind would suspect me? PP poor SD stuttering P Professor Quirrell when that overgrown bat was swooping around. I would. Harry? I believe the question was, who in their right mind? Neville reminded him. Oh, right. But maybe I wouldn't have figured it out if you didn't have bloody Tom Riddle on the back of your head. This was news to all present. Neville had no idea what Harry was talking about in the slightest. Quirrell had no idea who Tom Riddle was, and Tom Riddle had no idea how Harry knew that that was his real name and not Voldemort. Quirrell evidently decided not to ask and snapped his fingers, tying both Neville and Harry up. Harry cursed himself for forgetting about that and focused on trying to remove the ropes without his wand. He could do it if he had enough time, but he'd need to concentrate. In the meantime, Quirrell took the opportunity to mutter to himself about how to find the stone. Suddenly, Voldemort said, Use the boy, use the boy. Neville started. Would that be Tom Riddle? He whispered. Harry merely nodded. Quirrell rounded on Harry. Yes, Potter, come here. He undid the ropes surrounding Harry and bade him to look in the mirror. Unlike the last time when Harry had thought the stone would be safer in his pocket than in the enchanted mirror that Quirrell couldn't figure out and was frustrated and desperate enough to rely on a child to get it, Harry didn't actually want the stone. Well, Quirrell asked impatiently, What do you see? I see my family. Harry paused. Again. Seriously, people, this isn't going to change, so stop asking. You don't see the stone? Quirrell asked, disappointed and a little skeptical. Why would I want the stone? Harry challenged. It seems safe enough where it is. As Harry began to discreetly inch away from Quirrell, Voldemort spoke again. The other boy has it. Harry froze. Damn it. He really should have mentioned that looking in the mirror was a bad idea. Quirrell started towards Neville, who, for his part, looked terrified. Let me speak to them face to face, Voldemort decided. While Quirrell was making his cursory protest and doing what Voldemort wanted anyway, Harry wandlessly and silently managed to free Neville. Ah! Neville yelped at seeing the face of Voldemort for the first time. Harry was calmer. He knew that he could handle Voldemort as he was now, he just wasn't sure about Neville. Harry Potter and Neville Longbottom. How ironic that it should be the two of you standing here together to face me. Ironic, yet fitting. Tom Riddle. I'm fairly certain you're a pedophile. Neville nearly choked. He didn't quite know who this was, but he had a nagging feeling that he should. You dare. Voldemort began angrily, although whether he was more upset by the use of his real name or by Harry's accusation, it was hard to say. Yeah, I do. Let's just skip the part where you're offended. I know your name. Get on with it, shall we? Harry suggested. Voldemort was silent for a moment. Then he said, there was a prophecy, you know? Harry tensed. What was Voldemort trying to do here? He hadn't said anything of the sort when Harry had first met him before. Was it because of Neville's presence? The prophecy told me that there would be a boy born at the end of July whose parents had defied me 3 times who would stop me. That could have applied to either of you. I chose to attack Harry here, and he did indeed stop me. Temporarily. Prophecy fulfilled. So you see, there really is no reason for me to kill you, or your friend for that matter, Neville. Just give me the stone in your pocket, and you have my word that I shall not harm either of you. The word of a liar and a murderer, Harry snapped. Why you? Neville swallowed hard. You destroyed my parents' minds. That wasn't me, Neville, that happened after I was gone. Bellatrix Lestrange, always one of my most faithful if misguided followers, thought that your parents, as prominent aurors and widely known to be close to that puppet master Dumbledore, would know what had happened. I do not condone their actions, and I will make them suffer for taking your parents from you, Neville. Just say the word. Give me the stone, and your parents will be avenged. Neville was shaking uncontrollably now. Why, you could have just as easily attacked me and killed my parents. But I didn't. Voldemort's voice was soft, persuasive. I went after Harry because I didn't want to spill any pureblood blood unnecessarily in case I chose wrong. Noble pureblood children such as yourself are the future, dear Neville. Driving your parents into insanity was such a waste. They were a fine witch and wizard. Once I'm restored, I will rectify every case of worthy purebloods such as your parents losing everything but their life. I can give you back your parents. Just give me the stone. Neville was quiet for a long moment. And no, I know. Before Voldemort could process Neville's refusal, Harry seized the opportunity and leapt at Quirrell, pressing his hands to the man's face. The pain in Harry's scar was so intense that Harry couldn't see. He knew he should probably have interceded before now, but, somewhat like Dumbledore, he wanted to give Neville an opportunity to face Voldemort and figured that refusing to give in to Voldemort even when he was promising everything would do wonders for Neville's still struggling self-esteem. Just as Harry was about to pass out, he heard Reducto, and Quirrell went still. He looked up and saw Neville, eyes wide, lower his wand. Oh, Harry! Neville! Hermione cried the minute they exited the corridor. For lack of any better ideas, they had simply rode Harry's broom up through the trapdoor. She immediately hugged them both. Hey, Hermione, Harry said weakly. Did you find Professor Dumbledore? Indeed she did. Dumbledore spoke up from behind Harry. How did he dash? It was best not to ask. Now, I'm sure you have many questions for me, and I know I have a few for you, but first why don't we get you all to the hospital wing? When Madame Pomfrey was done tending to them and Ron and Hermione sent on their way, Dumbledore returned. You should probably give Professor Dumbledore the Philosopher's Stone, Harry started things off by suggesting. Neville's eyes widened. Oh right, I had completely forgotten about that. Indeed, Dumbledore's eyes twinkled. You must have had a lot of excitement down there. Harry snorted. Well, that's one word for it. I killed Professor Quirrell. Silence followed that declaration, and Neville just stared down at his hospital bed, clutching at the sheets. He hadn't been discharged because he hadn't stopped shaking once they reached the hospital wing. What happened? Dumbledore's tone was grave. Sensing Neville probably didn't want to talk about it, Harry took a deep breath and began. Quirrell was after the stone. Ron was taken by the queen in the chess match we were playing, and there was only enough of the potion to get us through the flames to see Quirrell for 2 people, so Hermione went back to Ron. The Mirror of Erised was there, and Quirrell tried to use me to get the stone, but I didn't really want it, and so Neville, who apparently wanted to get but not use the stone, managed to get it instead. This caused Quirrell to unwrap his turban and reveal that he had Voldemort on the back of his head. Voldemort, he promised Neville his parents back if he just handed over the stone. Neville said no. Voldemort was going to attack Neville, so I used my mother's sacrifice magical love protection to burn Quirrell's face, and right when I was about to collapse from magical exhaustion, Neville fired a reducto at him. I killed him, Neville said again. Quirrell was already dead, Dumbledore told him gently. He was dead the minute he allowed Voldemort to take up residence in his body. He would have died anyway the minute Voldemort left him, which he would have done tonight, regardless of if he took the stone from you and crafted himself a new body or if he failed and decided that poor queerness had outlived his usefulness. So, it's not my fault. Neville sounded dubious. No, it's not, Harry agreed. He knew that it would take a while for it to truly sink in, and he wished that it hadn't had to happen this way, but there was nothing he could do about that now. He honestly hadn't expected Neville to attack Quirrell while he was burning him with his touch. So, what's going to happen to the stone now? Harry asked, to change the subject onto less depressing matters. Dumbledore then proceeded to explain how the Flammels were all set to die now, but it was okay because they were really old anyway. So, maybe it was only slightly less depressing. Do you have any more questions? Dumbledore asked gingerly. Well, Voldemort did say one interesting thing I was hoping you could explain, Harry said innocently. Dumbledore nodded, indicating that he should continue. Apparently, there was some sort of a prophecy about Neville and I that caused him to come after me, Harry said slowly, enjoying the sight of all the color draining out of Dumbledore's face. Something about me being the only one to stop him? I did not intend for you to find out like this, Dumbledore said at last, sighing. And especially not at such a young age. I had hoped, but alas, what's done is done, I suppose, and there is no use lamenting the fact. I wish I had a pensive with me, but I do not, so I will just simply tell you the prophecy. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hat of the other, for neither can live while the other survives. And that could mean either me or Harry's? Neville asked, looking faint. Alas, no, the prophecy is about Harry. When Voldemort chose to go after Harry and gave him his scar, he marked him and made the prophecy about him, Dumbledore replied. Neville tried not to look too relieved as he realized it would not probably be up to Harry to stop Voldemort. Sir? You realize that I'm 11, right? And not really the most responsible person around? And you really shouldn't expect me to be the only one who can kill him. I wouldn't dream of expecting anything from you for a few years yet. And, in fact, I cannot make you do anything. On the other hand, by the time that you come face to face with Voldemort for the last time, knowing he wants to kill you, knowing he has killed or tried to kill countless others, you may very well decide that killing him would be for the best. Certainly, if he regains a body and does not stop hunting you, chances are very good that either of you will die at the hand of the other. Harry walked to the leaving feast with a heavy heart. Sure, Hagrid had gotten him a scrapbook filled with pictures of his parents. He'd spent all night at the impromptu we're graduating party the 7th years through, at Tonks' insistence, as he didn't really know the other 7th years very well, and he'd get to see Ginny again soon. On the other hand, Gryffindor had indeed won the House Cup this year, despite his best efforts to the contrary. Harry tried his best to appear depressed when Dumbledore announced that Gryffindor was in the lead. On the bright side, this meant no need for last-second points. Recent events must be taken into account, Dumbledore continued. Harry groaned. Of course they must. Dumbledore awarded Ron 50 points for the best-played game of chess Hogwarts had ever seen, despite the fact that there was really no objective way to measure something like that. Hermione 50 points for not poisoning herself or her classmates. Neville 50 points for lighting a rare and valuable plant on fire. And Harry got 60 points for not telling a responsible adult about Quirrell's attempt to steal the stone, and for endangering several of his classmates. Of course, Dumbledore might have phrased it slightly differently, but it was still blatant favoritism. Harry started banging his head on the table, and didn't stop until Percy got so annoyed he threatened to hex him. It really wouldn't do to get Percy in the habit of doing that, as his refusal to do so was really the only reason why Harry was able to do some of his more public after-hours activities. The celebration at the Gryffindor table over finally being the best sycophantic house got so annoying that halfway through the feast Harry got up and went to go sit by the Slytherins. He spent the rest of the feast commiserating with them and complaining about the blatant favoritism. Dumbledore, who couldn't hear what he was saying, smiled broadly at Harry's mature attitude of reaching out across house lines. As the Hogwarts Express was pulling into the station, Harry was honestly glad that the train ride was over for the first time in his life. He, Ron, Hermione, and Neville had just sat back and let all of Harry's various acquaintances and Neville's herbology friends come visit them throughout the train ride. Unfortunately, this had not stopped Hermione from pestering Harry about his exam results. So he made the highest first-year grades since Dumbledore and was now being hailed as a prodigy. To both of their annoyances, it was really just the 12-year age advantage. After all, being an adult who had to sit through boring meetings and hold press conferences and regularly petition the Wisengamot meant that he officially had an attention span sufficient enough to pay attention in Bin's class, so he even did well in History of Magic despite his blatant refusal to study. And that was why Hermione was convinced he either cheated or was holding back his brilliance all this time. "You must come and stay this summer," said Ron. "All of you, I'll send you an owl." Oh. And by all I meant everyone but Malfoy and his goons, which just left Harry, Hermione, and Neville. "Like I would even want to," Draco shot back. "My bedroom's bigger than your whole house." Harry rolled his eyes. "Draco, remember what we talking about how it's not nice to stalk your father's political rivals? And that reminds me, this might be a weird question, but do you have a house elf named Dobby?" Draco nodded. "Now who's stalking who?"
You are.
"You're stalking Ron."
We just talked about this."
"But anyway, the reason I asked is because you remember how my scar told me that Quirrell was out to kill me?" Draco nodded uncertainly. "Well, it also told me that you have a house elf named Dobby who will steal all of my mail this summer, so if you could order him to leave my mail alone, that'd be great." Draco shrugged. "Why not?" Once they got off the train and lined up to go through the gates in small groups, Tonks came up to him, hair bubblegum pink. "So I got accepted into the Auror Academy," she said. "And this is my celebratory hairstyle. So you're going to keep it like that?" Harry asked, amused.
"Yep.
"I'm going to keep it like this every time. I'm not disguising myself for as long as I'm over the moon about this. I would have told you earlier, of course, but I was too busy hiding from Percy." "Hiding from Percy?"
"Why?"
"He's like the least threatening person ever," Harry pointed out. I know, but he wanted to hear me go over Newts for the third time and ask how I thought he did during OWLS by regaling me with the fascinating tale of every little answer he put or spell he cast," Tonks complained. "Sounds like Hermione," Ron said bluntly. "Hey, so isn't there anything I can do to get you to let me call you Nymph? I mean, your first name," Harry hastily amended as Tonks glared at him. "Nope, sorry." "Oh, come on. I'll give you my firstborn," Harry promised. Tonks laughed. "Aren't you a little young to be thinking about that kind of thing?" Harry shrugged. "By all estimates, he should be a dad by now. If it was a boy, they'd name him James Sirius, and if it was a girl, they'd go with Lily Luna. Keep in touch, won't you?" Harry asked her as she was about to head through the barrier. "Oh, you couldn't get rid of me if you tried," she told him as she disappeared. When Harry and Ron went through, followed by Hermione and Neville, Harry heard quite a bit of gossip surrounding Draco Malfoy and the question Harry threw on his parentage at the beginning of the year. He snorted. He'd completely forgotten about that. "There he is, Mum, there he is, look," Ginny exclaimed, jumping up and down, the minute she saw Harry. "Hi, Ginny, right?" Harry smiled at her. "Why, yes," she said, looking anywhere but at him. "You're going to Hogwarts next year, right?" She merely nodded.
I'll see you there, then.
Oh, and Mrs. Weasley, I wanted to thank you for your very thoughtful Christmas present. Oh, it was nothing, dear, she assured him. Well, I'd better go, Harry said. I think my uncle might still be mad at me. Since September? Mrs. Weasley asked, shocked. Well, he did send me death threats at Christmas, Harry told her. Oh my. When Harry arrived at home, he saw a large black dog lying on the Dursleys' front lawn as if waiting for him. Harry quickly stashed his stuff in his room. He might have threatened to turn Uncle Vernon blue if he tried to lock his school things away, but did promise not to use any magic, and ran out to meet him. Hey boy, he greeted. You look like you could use a walk. I'm going to the park. Come with me? The dog just cocked its head like it didn't understand, but consented to follow Harry. Once he reached the park, which was thankfully deserted, he sat down on one of the swings and looked straight at the dog. Well, Sirius. It's been a while. Chapter 10. Sirius froze. Come now, Padfoot. Don't be like that. It'll be a pretty piss-poor reunion if one of us is pretending to be a stray dog the whole time, Harry told him, crossing his arms. Sirius quickly resumed his human form. He looked better than Harry remembered, probably because he had escaped earlier and had 3 years of freedom under his belt before he came back in time. Reunion, he asked carefully. What do you mean reunion? Harry Potter can't possibly remember me. I haven't seen him since he was an infant. Who are you? Harry smiled. Harry Potter. But I think you've got your facts wrong. You haven't seen me since you tripped through the veil of death. I didn't trip through it. Sirius protested indignantly. Bellatrix hit me with a curse, and while I admit that I probably should have been paying more attention, it could have happened to anyone and wait. How do you know, Dash?
How do you?
Harry countered. I was there. So was I, Harry told him. You fell through the veil. Too? What? Were you chasing me or something? I'd have thought that Moony would have had the sense to restrain you. He was standing right there. That's highly irresponsible, especially for him. Sirius trailed off. Harry snorted. I hardly think you're one to lecture anyone else about responsibility, but for the record, he did. No, I came through the veil later. How much later? Sirius asked. Harry shrugged. 8 years or so. Sirius's eyes bulged out. 8 years? That makes you, what? 23? Harry nodded. Mentally, yes, although physically, of course, I'm closer to 12. What happened? Did you defeat Voldemort? What did you come back? Did everyone die? Tell me everything, Sirius demanded. Well, Dumbledore got Snape to assist in his suicide at the end of 6th year, but didn't bother telling anyone else about it, so we all thought he was evil until right after he died at the end of what would have been my 7th year, had Voldemort not taken over the ministry half a month or so before school started. I spent most of the year on the camping trip from hell. A myriad of people died, including Remus, Tonks, and Fred, and I killed Voldemort after he killed me. Oh, and Remus and Tonks got married. What was that last part?
Sirius asked.
Remus and Tonks got married? Harry repeated innocently. No, the other last part. The one about Voldemort killing you, Sirius clarified. Oh, well, he killed me, and I had a nice chat with Dumbledore's soul, who informed me that just because I was imagining things that didn't make it not real, and then I got better. Sirius just stared at him. It gets better, Harry grinned. Apparently, I only survived because of the power of love. Sirius groaned. For the record, when you're telling this to other people, try to come up with an explanation that sounds more badass. Who says I'm telling other people? But if you don't tell other people that you're from the future, how will they be prepared? Sirius asked sensibly. What do they need to be prepared for? Things ended pretty decently last time. I married Ginny Weasley, who was pregnant with my child at the time I left, and Ron and Hermione got married. So, really, aside from Fred dying, it was one big, happy Weasley family. Molly was thrilled to bits, let me tell you. I can imagine, Sirius remarked wryly. Besides, if I can destroy the Horcruxes before Voldemort's rebirth, then I just have to wait until he uses my blood to revive himself. Let him kill me to get rid of the final Horcrux, come back and kill him. You make it sound so easy, Sirius muttered. I've got 3 years, I'll make it work. Are you up to helping me torch the Horcruxes? Harry asked. Do you even have to ask? Sirius asked. Although I'm not quite sure how one goes about destroying Horcruxes except exposure to Dementors, basilisk venom, and fiendfire. Exposure to Dementors? And how do you even know about Horcruxes, anyway? They're supposed to be really obscure, Harry repeated, confused. Sirius nodded. Oh yes. Horcruxes are part of a wizard's soul, and so a Dementor's kiss can destroy it. And please, Harry, I'm a black. Knowing about Horcruxes is just one of the many benefits of growing up in one of the darkest families in Britain.
Guess so.
Hey, do you know fiendfire? Harry asked. I've never actually tried, but I've heard that with a little practice, any moderately powerful wizard can have some measure of control over it, Sirius told him. So, can you start learning it? I would, except my wand is currently being monitored as I'm technically a minor, and I want this out of the way as soon as possible. See if you can get it down by the end of the summer. And Sirius, whatever you do, you absolutely cannot tell anyone that I came back, Harry said seriously. Why not? Don't you trust your friends? Sirius asked. It's not a question of trust, Sirius. It's just that if I start telling people, then they'll be all like, Harry, you're an adult and should really start acting like one. Besides, Snape is a hero. You really shouldn't be harassing him, and let me tell you, I had a lot of fun last year. I want to have fun this year, and every year for the rest of my life. Once I tell people that I'm older than I appear, that fun goes out the window, and I have to deal with responsibility. Harry wrinkled his nose at that. Besides, then people will be pestering me about their futures, and do you really think Remus and Tonks, Ginny and I, Ron and Hermione, or Bill and Fleur will get together if they know about it in the future? God, no. Besides, Hannah is so shy now, and Neville isn't anymore that if I told either of them about their future, I could destroy it. Nah, best to just let history continue naturally. Or as naturally as I can, while still doing whatever I feel like, Harry amended. Sirius snorted. Now that's more like it. But while we're on the subject of doing whatever it is we feel like, how are we going to get me cleared? I'd rather it be sooner rather than later, personally, although I've had some fun this past year in Spain. Oh, so you did go to Majorca? And I think that once I get to the Weasleys, I can nab Wormtail and Voldemort's first Horcrux in one fell swoop. Can you wait 2 months or so until we go to Diagon Alley to shop? Sirius looked him straight in the eye. I've waited 15 years to clear my name. I think I can wait a little longer. The next month and a half or so passed unbelievably slowly for Harry. He'd been getting mail, which was nice, but wanted to put off going to the Weasleys until after his birthday for 2 reasons. 1, a quiet meeting with Dobby. 2, it would be harder for him to meet with Sirius under Molly Weasley's watchful eye. It wasn't like he didn't like the woman, he did. It was just that she had a tendency to smother everyone with her love, and he had long since outgrown the need for a mother. He had been so bored that he actually took the time to follow through with his vague plan from the year before to try and mend his relationship with his blood relatives. And, surprisingly, it seemed to work. He had actually volunteered to help his Aunt Petunia around the house and shared with her some of Neville's gardening tips, which caused them to spend quite a bit more time together and made her grudgingly admit that he was earning his keep. She wouldn't admit to anything more, but he did notice a distinct improvement in her treatment of him. As for Dudley, that had been even easier. He just volunteered to play with him when his friends were busy, and Dudley was far too thrilled to be able to play 2-person computer games whenever he wanted to risk upsetting Harry too much and forcing him to stick to 1-person games. He highly doubted either of his relatives liked him any better, but at least he had to deal with less open hostility. His Uncle Vernon, no doubt still sore from the scene Harry made at the train station last year, just growled whenever Harry was in a room, as if he didn't trust himself to do anything else. His friends were all also keeping him busy via letters. Harry was trying to convince Hermione that Lockhart was a fraud, Tonks to help break into Bellatrix's vault, Ron that being sorted into Slytherin wasn't an indication of evil, Ginny that he wasn't some sort of god, Neville that he should continue to show a backbone even though he was back with his relatives, Cedric to come play Quidditch with him once he was at the Weasleys, as they lived right by each other. Draco that knowing details about him that he had no business knowing, allegedly via his scar, was not the same thing as stalking, Percy to voluntarily leave his room more often than just mealtimes, and the twins to teach Ginny to ride a broom. Due to his persistence and utter boredom, these goals were coming along nicely. Although Ron still wanted proof, Hermione still wanted an autograph, and Tonks still wanted more details. Harry was sure that Ginny would regress after coming face-to-face with him again, but she was actually managing to converse normally with him through their letters, now. It was really a good thing that Hedwig appreciated the workout, Harry reflected, because she was almost never at the Dursleys, which definitely helped ease relations on that front. On the night of the Dursleys' dinner party, which also happened to be Harry's birthday, but it's not like they really cared, Harry was going to be quite busy. The first thing he needed to do was to make sure he was out of the house when Dobby decided to pop by. Sure enough, 8 on the Dobby popped in front of Harry. Fortunately, Harry was sitting on a park bench with Sirius in dog form lying at his feet. Dobby, I was wondering if you'd make an appearance," Harry greeted him warmly. "Please sit down. How's Draco doing? You can only tell so much from letters." Dobby, who had been about to burst into tears at the fact that not only did Harry know his name, but he asked him to sit down like an equal when he realized what else the wizard had said. "Draco? Yeah, Draco Malfoy. The scion of the family you serve. How's he been?" "How is Harry Potter knowing of Dash?" Dobby began. "Magic scar," Harry said simply. Yes. Dobby has been hearing Master Draco complain very loudly about that," Dobby admitted. But Dobby did not believe it. "How else would I have known to ask Draco to order you to not steal my mail?" Harry asked rhetorically. Dobby nodded. It was a good point. "I don't think that you'd be required to punish yourself just for coming to see me, but either way, let me help you avoid any more self-inflicted injuries by informing you that I already know that Mr. Malfoy intends to give Ginny Weasley Tom Riddle's diary that will open the Chamber of Secrets and unleash a basilisk on Hogwarts. I can further promise you that I will always carry a mirror with me and that I won't do anything too stupid, but I will not promise not to go back to Hogwarts. If you use magic and disguise the signature as that of a wizard, and so the Ministry sends a bloody owl no matter what the occupants of the house may be doing or who may be over, then they will start treating me like the Malfoys treat you, and it won't stop me anyway, as my friends will just come to break me out," Harry explained calmly. "Although I do appreciate the sentiment." Suddenly, a faint pop was heard as someone apparat into the woods surrounding the park. "Well, I hate to cut this short, but it looks like my next appointment just arrived." She's early," Harry muttered. "So, unless you want more witnesses, I'd suggest you get going." "It was nice meeting you," Harry said cheerfully as Dobby cast him a rueful look and apparat away. "I hope you know what you're doing, Harry," Tonks said as she waked up to him. "Because we could get in serious trouble for this." "I know, but it's important. It's the only way to make sure that Voldemort actually dies. I mean, having him just floating around and possessing our defense against the dark arts teacher was bad enough. Imagine if he somehow managed to regain a body." Tonks shuddered. "All right, but remember, you owe me." She grabbed Harry's hand to apparate and noticed he was holding onto a dog. "What's with the dogs?" "He's my godfather," Harry explained. "Your parents named a dog as your godfather?" Tonks asked skeptically. "Well, my dad did at any rate. But then, you'll have to remember that my father and his friends are Fred and George's heroes. Bonkers, the whole lot of you," Tonks muttered as she apparat them to Diagon Alley. As it was dark, there weren't a lot of people out and about, although Harry suspected that the leaky cauldron was packed. It usually was any time after 5. Tonks, Sirius, and Harry made their way to Gringotts. Once inside, Tonks transformed into Bellatrix Lestrange. The goblins didn't really care if she was supposed to be in Azkaban nor that she was a convicted murderess, as the affairs of wizards never really interested them. When Tonks claimed she lost her key, the goblins did a simple blood test which she passed, being a close relative of hers, and the goblin on duty issued her a new key. As Bellatrix was in Azkaban, and thus legally dead, as was the head of the Black family, Sirius, and Tonks was a relative of them both, she could have just laid claim to the vault herself, but Harry was afraid that that would make her a target, and she hadn't even begun Auror training yet. When they opened Bellatrix's vault door, Harry grabbed the Hufflepuff's cup, and Tonks decided to liberate a bit of gold and some Black family heirlooms that had been part of Bellatrix's dowry, but she was sure her mother would appreciate more than her reportedly headcase and imprisoned aunt. although how she was going to explain how she got them. Well, she could always blame it on Harry. He'd probably have a more convincing explanation anyway. Immediately following leaving Gringotts, Harry had Tonks drop him and Sirius off at the Weasleys'. Apparently Neville had stayed with them in June and Hermione had stayed for part of July, so it was just him. To his delight, Percy was downstairs playing chess with Ron when Harry got there. He was about an hour earlier than he said he'd be, but that really couldn't be helped, and what else was he supposed to do until it was 10? Ginny turned bright red when she was him and looked like she was wanted to bolt from the room, but refrained. There were improvements already. Now, to keep them coming. 2 weeks after arriving, it was time to go to Diagon Alley. Harry was incredibly anxious and hoped that he hadn't or wouldn't do anything to change events enough that Lucius pawned the diary off on someone else. He had to admit, he'd gotten rather used to knowing what was going to happen and he'd hate to lose it before he absolutely had to. He'd had fun so far. He'd announced that Sirius was his new pet Padfoot and Sirius delighted in following the twins around and watching them prank people. He had made it a point to talk to Ginny whenever she happened to be in the room, and even though it was an uphill struggle, she had slowly graduated from monosyllabic answers to short sentences. Harry might have accidentally suggested to the twins that Percy might be spending so much time by himself this summer as opposed to what he'd apparently done previous summers, because he might have a girlfriend, and the twins had jumped at the suggestion and kept insisting that Percy spend time with them, hoping he'd reveal something about his mystery girlfriend's identity. And if Harry didn't know better, he'd think Percy was enjoying driving the twins crazy with his cryptic answers on the subject. Apparently the twins had taken his suggestion to teach Ginny as a challenge, as they had no idea that she'd ever been on a broom before, and had been pleasantly surprised to find out that she could outlie people twice her age, no one who played Quidditch, of course, but then, she was self-taught. Cedric had been over 3 times already, and they had tons of fun playing 3-on-3 Quidditch, and Percy, of course, took the twins' distraction to retreat to his room to study. Though he hadn't really known Cedric very well until they'd both been Hogwarts champions, Harry found that he rather enjoyed the older boy's company and resolved to try and keep him alive this time. Once at Diagon Alley, Harry convinced his friends to head to the apothecary first so he could go and pick up his special order Mandrake restorative draft. So maybe 3 dozen was a bit paranoid of him, but if there was one thing Hermione had taught him, it was that it never hurt to be prepared. Ron, Hermione, and Neville, who had arranged to go with the Weasleys when he'd stayed with them that summer, all looked at him strangely, but Harry's only comment was that his Scar thought it was a good idea. He wondered briefly how long it would be before people thought he was crazy if he kept using that excuse to explain away his future knowledge. Eventually, the trio plus Neville made their way to Flourish and Blots. Harry tactfully suggested that the Weasleys only buy 2 book sets so that they could share them, and Mrs. Weasley, though a bit embarrassed, seemed to think that it was a good idea. Suddenly, Lockhart's photographer crashed into Ron. "Out of the way there," he snarled. "This is for the Daily Prophet." "Big deal," Ron muttered. Lockhart looked up and saw Ron. Unfortunately, Harry was standing right next to him. He leapt to his feet and shouted, "It can't be Harry Potter's?" "Where?" Harry made a point of looking around, as if searching for himself. "Aren't you Harry's?" Gilderoy asked, confused. "Nope," Harry said brightly. "But your Scar," Lockhart protested. "Unfortunate cooking accident," Harry said shortly, repeating his story from the previous year. "Then who are you?" Lockhart demanded. "Draco Malfoy." "Oh, well, let me give you a free set of books to make up for this unfortunate mix-up," Lockhart said, handing him a set of books. He then turned his attention back to his adoring fans. "Here," Harry said, dumping the books into Ginny's cauldron. "Now you only need 1 set. But what about your books, Harry?" Hermione asked. "I don't intend to get them, Hermione." "But then how will you learn anything?" she demanded. Harry snorted. "Please, it's not like I'm going to learn anything this year anyway. He's a fraud, remember?" Hermione nodded reluctantly. It had taken quite some time to disabuse her of the notion that the Master Obliviator was a genius. "Harry, why did you tell him you were Dash?" Mrs. Weasley began. "It was you." Draco Malfoy's voice rang out from behind him. "Yes, Draco?" Harry asked politely. You started that rumor last year, didn't you? Draco demanded. The one about me being Snape's love child. Technically, Fred and George started that rumor, Harry pointed out. But yeah, I did have a hand in it. To be fair, though, it's not like we were friends at the time. But you just brought it to people's attention again. What's your excuse this time?
Harry
shut his mouth abruptly. I actually don't have one. Sorry. Draco rolled his eyes. And after I took the trouble of ordering Dobby to stay away from your mail, oh, please, that couldn't have taken more than a couple minutes, Harry shot back. Although I do appreciate it. So, however did you manage to survive a summer with the Muggles? I mean, I'd imagine that would be even worse than a summer with the Weasleys, Draco said. Well, my aunt and cousin seemed to hate me less than usual this year, but my uncle looked like he wanted to strangle me every time he came near me, Harry replied. Fun, Draco said sarcastically. Remind me why you think Muggles are worth caring about again? Because my relatives treat me about the equivalent of how pure-blood fanatics treat Muggles, Harry suggested. Minus the attempted murder? Ron, quick, your mother's distracted by Lockhart. Let's make our escape, Mr. Weasley said as he and the twins struggled over to them. Well, Arthur Weasley, Lucius Malfoy drawled. Harry rolled his eyes. Good God, this was a chance meeting in a crowded bookstore, not an epic showdown in the Old West. Lucius, Arthur nodded, barely even pretending to be polite. Busy time at the ministry, I hear. All those raids, I hope they're paying you overtime. He reached into Jenny's cauldron and pulled out the brand new copy of A Beginner's Guide to Transfiguration. Harry had insisted on paying for their schoolbooks, as they were putting him up for a month. Arthur and Molly had only agreed to this after he threatened to buy them all Nimbus 2000 ones instead. Who knew the way to beat an aversion to charity was to offer more charity. I guess they are. It's sad, really, how desperate you are for money that you would lower yourself to be a disgrace to the name of a wizard for a few extra galleons. We have a very different idea of what disgraces the name of wizard, Malfoy, Arthur said. Clearly, Lucius said, his eyes straying towards the Grangers. The company dash. Personally, my definition of a disgrace to the name of wizard is anyone over the age of 15 who can't cast a simple Expelliarmus without dropping their wand, Harry piped up. Or someone who can't ride a broom without falling off, Draco added. Or someone who doesn't like Quidditch, was Ron's contribution. That definitely broke the tension, and the Malfoys left without incident. Well, almost. Watching closely, Harry could see Lucius slipping the diary into Ginny's book. Too bad the fight had been averted, even if it was entirely Harry's doing, as he had been planning on betting Draco and the twins that Hagrid would win the fight between their fathers. Oh well. When Harry and the Weasleys arrived back at the Burrow, after saying goodbye to the Grangers, who walked out into Muggle London, and Neville, who fled home, everyone put their things in their room, and Ron immediately challenged Harry to a game of chess. As Harry had accepted whenever Ron asked previously, following his theory that the more Ron beat Harry in chess, the less of an inferiority complex he would have regarding him, he couldn't really think of an adequate reason to decline and go upstairs instead, and so was forced to play a match. His heart really wasn't in it, though, and he played even worse than usual. The minute he lost, he practically flew up the stairs and into Ginny's room. He tore open her Transfiguration book. Nothing. He looked through the rest of her school supplies. Nothing. He spent the rest of the afternoon searching through the whole house. Still nothing. By nightfall, he was forced to come to one terrifying conclusion. The diary was gone, and so was Scabbers. Thank you for joining us for Part 1, Chapters 1 to 10 of Harry Potter and the Masters of Time by Sarah 1281 here at Grimoire Audiobooks. As we've seen so far, Harry's adventure through time is filled with unexpected twists, humor, and a whole lot of chaos. But don't worry, there's plenty more magical madness ahead. If you've enjoyed the ride, make sure to like, comment, and share your thoughts. We're aiming for 25 likes and 25 comments to bring you the next part of this wild, time-bending journey. Your support helps us continue sharing these amazing stories. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. More magical adventures are just around the corner. Thank you for being part of the Grimoire Audiobooks family. Until next time, keep your wands ready and your time turners close.